It doesn't seem like we have a quorum yet. We only have 6. Hopefully others show up.
Yeah, I think Tom and Fred are out of town.
Okay.
Well, I'm out of town, but I'm still here.
Well, thank you, Phil.
The wonders of modern technology.
Yes.
I'm in town, but I'm not all there.
That can be said for a lot of us there, Sid. Okay, so Greg just got on.
So do you know why the banana had to go out with the fig? Because he couldn't get a decent date.
That must
So-
have been Sid.
So, Mayor, do you count on the committee of the whole, or what is the quorum when we're one down on a council member?
You know,
Yeah, I do count. I'm a voting member, so we'd still need 8 out of 12, right, Holly?
Well, I think we have 8. We have Phil, Lisa, Sid, Brett, Greg, Ozzy, you and me, so that should be 8.
We only have 11.
Right.
1, 2, 3.
We only have 11 council people.
The mayor's
Correct.
12.
yeah, it's,
1,
So we needed 8, and then we have 8. So I guess I'd like to call the meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is new business. We have a presentation. Is the presentation people ready?
Always.
We are. We have Dave Ferris from Ellers on the call. I'll have him share his screen eventually here, but just a quick introduction on the project, and he'll get into it in depth as we go through the presentation. But last year, as part of the budgeting process, the council approved some funds to set aside for a 5-year financial management plan. I think it's been almost a decade since we had done one. So we worked with Ellers to kind of work through 2 sides of this, the CIP obviously, and then the operating piece. Kind of paralleled our budget work, and we just kind of bounced a lot of ideas off. Dave did a lot of work on this. I really do appreciate everything he's done. I learned a lot going through it, and it kind of validated some of the work we were doing internally as well. So he's going to kind of go through the initial findings of this financial management plan that we went through. Just a quick presentation. It's not final. We're still kind of working through it. We'll probably finalize it as we wrap up the actual budget this year. But I just kind of wanted to give you a quick introduction. And with that, let me find Dave and I will turn the show over to him.
Well, Jim, and I wish I could say that it was quick. I'll try to, there's a lot of material in here and I'll try to get through it as quick as I can. I notice your agenda has quite a bit to it. We'll just start off with the agenda. So we're going to go through basically the structure of the financial management plan and some of the goals that come out of that. We'll do some highlights of the bond rating that you got in June related to this year's issue. We'll talk about a couple of historic issues. We'll go through the capital project and debt plan. We'll talk through the operating fund projections and then how all that kind of impacts the levy limit as well as the expenditure restraint. Then we'll give you kind of a summarized version of what the tax rate looks like for the 5 years. And then we're going to go through the TIF cash flows. I think I sat through a presentation that Jamin did last year, so maybe he can take the year off with what we're going to do here tonight. And then we just have a summary comments that we'll wrap up with. So the initial financial management plan, basically the CIP is really the Kickstarter on the whole project, and it really feeds the projects and what the funding sources are into the capital projects fund, and then whatever is issued has debt issues related to it, really drives the debt service fund as well. When you take the debt service fund, tax levy, and the general fund operating levy and pull them together into the tax levy and rate forecast, we can kind of give you an idea of how the city's budget for 2021 and some of the forecasted years look. We use equalized value because we want to see things on an apples to apples basis, and because assessed value, especially with a market that could have increasing home values, just kind of makes things not comparable. We use equalized in this. So when you see tax rate, these are the equalized tax rates. And if you were to take your tax bill to try to figure out how much you pay yourself in debt service taxes, you would take the market value or the fair market value on your tax bill to do that. So out of the tax levy forecast, it also kind of we get some information that we can go through the levy limit worksheet, kind of throw it through the next 5 years and see if there's any pressure points, and then we also take a look at expenditure restraint, and then we look at the general fund balance. So goals, what we want the financial management plan, first of all, the financial management plan is really yours. We assist you in putting together. When we get done, what we're hoping is that you'll kind of take ownership of it, and if there's some changes you want made, we can make those as well, and have something come back with that updated final report. But we want you to consider this a tool that you use on an annual basis to kind of figure out, where you are and where you want to go. So one of the goals we would want is to provide an estimate of future tax levy requirements, the associated tax rate based on the set of assumptions that staff and Ellers work through. We want the plan to support the political decision-making process with regard to service levels, capital spending, and financial management. We want to help identify potential financial pressure points in advance of their occurrence. And that would be, can we stay within the levy limit? Obviously you have to make it. There's no way you can't do that. But, do we have a problem down the road where we might need to take a look at how we're going to make that? And this will give you kind of a future look at, what can we do to make sure that we don't run into an issue later on. Other things that you can look at is how the debt issuance for the capital plan affects your debt limit and things like that. So those are the pressure points we're talking about. And then what we want to do is kind of provide guidance to ensure stable health and maintain your bond rating. So a lot of things we talk about today are things that we really need to think about to make sure that we maintain that AA2 rating that you have. It's a really great rating for a city your size, and so you should be very, very proud of that rating. So the first thing we did, and actually you're my guinea pig, I took the rating report. They have a scorecard in there, and I grabbed some municipalities that are in Dane County. Some are comparable, some are a little bit bigger, but I wanted you to be able to see where these municipalities are compared to Stoughton. The medians from Moody's, I also plugged in. We just got that information from them. There's a couple of cases where that number doesn't, or that bar doesn't make any sense, and I'm not going to be able to explain why that's out of whack, but there's one page where I kind of looked at it and wonder if I should even include it. So the way you read this is in this graph, or in this page at least, the blue bars are where that municipality is as far as, in this case, full value on the first one, and then the orange line is what rating they received for that particular item. So in the case of Stoughton on full value, you're rated an A. You can tell your value is quite a bit lower than a Wanakee or a Sun Prairie, which are more in the AA area. So that's how you can read these graphs as far as your comparability to other municipalities. So the first item is economy, and you can see the items that are in here, and I won't go into too much detail. We've got a lot to get through, but that gives you some idea of how you compare in the economy area. The second part is management. Institutional framework is kind of very general term, but really Moody's rates all Wisconsin governments A on this item. Institutional framework encompasses levy limits, effects on the municipalities, the effects of TIF districts on municipalities. And what they also say is that in Wisconsin, revenues and expenditures are very predictable. So they assign an A rating on this item to everybody. The second half of this is operating history. And as you can tell, you're in pretty good shape with your AA rating on this one. And you can see how, having average operations to operating expenditures being 1-to-1, obviously that means you have a balanced budget. Now, why Waunakee and Verona are not AA is beyond me. I went back today to look at that, and for some reason, even though they have balanced budgets, they're only rated an A. So you're doing pretty good there. There must be something else in their notching that bumps you up over those municipalities. The third item on their scorecard is the financial measures, and you can see how you stack up rating wise and how you stack up financially on some of these. Like I said, the one graph that doesn't make any sense is this one where Moody's median is basically at the AAA, up there with like a Sun Prairie, who's a AAA rating. And I don't really understand why that's a AA bar. So that's what I meant by there's some other medians that just don't make sense in this. So you can see how you do on the financial measures. And the last section is the 20% of the scorecard or your rating goes to debt and net pension liabilities. Now this is kind of a reverse of those other graphs. You want a shorter bar in this case because you want less debt to get a better rating. And so you can see the municipalities that have less debt or less of an issue with so like for instance, the Moody's pension one, you have less value. So that pension amount to full value is kind of skewed because of how much growth the other municipalities have over year growth. So that's how you can read these. You're still doing pretty well. You're at least an A in these sections. If not, yeah, you're pretty much an A right across the bat here. So that's an area that we'll go over in just a second here, because when we get to the rating report, that's the area that they kind of give you a little ding there on the weak part. So that's an area that we can try to strive to go after. But as I said, on June 1st, we were affirmed a AA2, which is great. Your strengths are basically access to the Madison metropolitan area. Anybody in Dane County gets a pretty strong bump in this area because of Madison. Your operating reserves and liquidity are in really good shape. That's something that they really look at hard. And of course, we've got probably the best retirement system in the nation. So that's a real good strength. As I talked about before, moderate, the middle of the road is the institutional framework. But that's what every Wisconsin municipality is rated, that Moody's rates. And then the weakness, like we talked about, that last page kind of shows you that the debt burden is a little higher than they think your size municipality should have, and also the fixed costs, which is the debt service and the pensions component. As far as how you could go up, tax-based growth, that's kind of a weird one for them to have in here. It's true, but you really, really have to grow to be a AA1. It would be probably so much growth that you wouldn't even know what Stoughton looked like anymore. So I can tell you that right now, Fitchburg is really trying to be a AAA, which is even, that'd be 2 notches above where you're rated. And so if you went back to that growth chart, you could see that Fitchburg just has a lot of value. So to get up, you're going to have to be more in line with municipalities that have that kind of growth. So that's pretty extreme, I think. I think what we would focus on here is more on maintaining the AA2, because a AA1, I think, probably is quite a ways out of reach at this point. Other things that would help if we were in that position to go up would be that debt burden that we talked about before got reduced or got more manageable. As far as the rating going down, they really like your operating reserves and liquidity. So if you start to use fund balance to fund your operations, or you keep giving money to the TIF districts for advances, you're going to find that you have less cash for the operating, and Moody's does not like advances to other funds. So that's really an area we want to make sure that we can stay on top of. And then, you know, if you kept growing your debt burden, that's something that could affect you and make you go down to maybe a AA3 or something like that. So why is the rating important? Well, this is a graph that I put together in July that shows the differences in interest rates per rating. So the lowest interest rates is the AAA line, the blue line. The AA line is the line you're on. A is a little higher, and then the one you never want to see, and anything worse than that, would be the BAA. As you can tell, they pay a lot more interest than you know, what the A or AA is. So the difference between the A and the AA is about 0.23% or 23 basis points. And so what we did is we kind of infused this into this year's borrowing and said, okay, if I add 23 points onto your interest rate that you got during the borrowing, what would that do? And it ends up costing you about $33,000 in financing costs. So it's important to have that rating up there. It saves you money when you go out in projects to borrow for projects. And, you know, this is, you know, a little smaller than some of the borrowings that we have built in this year's plan. So, you know, the bigger the issue, obviously, the more you would save on your interest by keeping that rating up. So as far as historic issues, you know, in the past, net new construction and levy limits have really restricted some of your ability to increase your operating expenditures, you know, namely in the staffing areas. One thing that has been a very big positive, and we just went through that amendment as well, is TID 7 growth has really had a big impact on net new construction. And we actually have a graph on the next page that shows you how much that has influenced the ability for the city to afford some of its operations or take on new projects that they borrow for without really killing your tax rate and your taxpayers. The third item is the TID financing methods. If historically you've put more risk on the city, you had a fairly big borrowing for that first TID 7 phase. But as as we went through this last time, you were more into the municipal revenue obligation, which puts that risk more on the developer, because if they don't produce, they obviously don't get that payout for that, that growth. So by moving that risk off of you, it reduces the pressure on the debt limit. It reduces just lost my train of thought. That's great. So it reduces your ability to borrow money. And really, it just puts some pressure on you that you wouldn't normally get if you could push that off to the developer. So this is the graph I was talking about before. The orange line is where you would have been without TIF 7 on the books. And with TIF 7 included, you can see in some years it's not quite double, but they gave you a nice kick. And obviously, with levy limits, net new construction is your number that allows you to raise your levy to cover your operations. So that TIF growth really does great things as far as being able to fund your operations and services that you have in place. So equalized value, like I said, is what we use to do the calculations in the forecast. The green bars are your historical equalized value numbers, and then the blue is the projections that we have in here. We've projected very conservatively using a value of 2% in this. Over the last 5 years, you've averaged almost 6%. So this is a very conservative projection in my opinion, and as well as Jamin's opinion. The one thing that does get added on top of that growth that we've projected is TIF closures. And as you know, in 2020, you passed a resolution to close TIF 3. You extended that one more year for the affordable housing program, but in 2022 is when you're going to see a little bit of kick in value going on to the tax rolls, as well as you're going to get some money out of the closure of that district. TIF 4, we'll talk a little bit more later, but in the projection right now, we have it closing basically in 2025, which affects the 2026 values. This schedule is a lot of numbers, and I will try not to bore you to death with it, but this is where you are today with the existing debt that you have. So you have existing general obligation debt, some other fees that give you your total obligations that you pay out right now for the city. Then there are some revenues that go against that pay for some of that debt. During the borrowing, the underwriter gave us money to make the notes more saleable. So they gave us some interest, or they gave us some money to basically pay our first probably 2 years of interest payments and make the notes look like they have a better interest rate. Thus, the investor probably looks at those like, you know, that's something I want, rather than it having probably the 0.6% that we had in the first year as an interest rate. So other revenue sources are from other funds, and that column says total paid by other funds is water, sewer, TIF districts, EMS. I'm trying to catch up because I want to make sure I don't miss out on saying what I wanted to say about that. And the stormwater utility. So, you know, of all the obligations you have of the 48 million, about 14.5 million is paid by other funds. And of that 14.5 million, 11,700,000 is TIF districts. So as I was talking about, you know, your TIF districts are using some of your capacity, and if you're able to shift that risk to the developer, you know, maybe that amount that the TIF districts are driving the obligations up, and or even having to pay for may go down in the future. We've included some levy support for some underperforming TIDs in the city, TIF 5, TIF 6, and TIF 8 we'll review at the end and show you kind of why we feel that a levy support would be something that's necessary to keep the city from advancing money from the general fund and thus dropping your operating reserves and your liquidity, which is, like I talked about, that's something you want to avoid doing for your financial health look to the rating agencies. The townships pay for a little bit of fire. We assess special assessments on projects and collect those, and we're allocating those out over the future years where we're collecting those. And then there's some fund balance that has been set aside for debt service payments that we're applying and helping to basically stabilize the tax rate. So once we get done applying all those abated sources, we call them, we get down to our net debt service levy. You can see in 2020, your debt service levy was 3.3 million. If we didn't do any more borrowing, you'd be at about 3.4 million this next year. And that equates over to that blue column to the tax rate, which is set up the way we like to see it, where you're hitting a number and then it's flowing downwards, which gives you flexibility to do those future projects. So that's how you read this. I think I got everything that's on the here. So a little bit about the capital projects and debt plan. When we put together the plan, Jamin provided projects that were more average year projects, so somewhere around a $3 million project number range. And then the city has always been kind of sticking to a 10-year repayment. And so we've always been using general obligation notes, and notes are flexible. You don't have as many hoops to jump through as you would if you had to use bonds. So that's the way that this is put together. The plan also attempts to stabilize that tax rate and minimizes the impact to the taxpayer and the debt limit. And then my understanding, and we popped this in here at the end of last week, was that last week you approved the CIP, which has a few bigger dollar amounts, not just the 3 million standard kind of projects, but you have some bigger projects in here too. And so, you know, one of the things with the plan that we do for you is we introduce this plan to you tonight and give you a chance to kind of give us some feedback, and then we can come back with another look. So if you're wanting to have us update that that impact on the debt profile by doing those bigger projects like the Whitewater project, that we could do that. You just have to let Jamin know what you'd like to see, and we can make that change. And then
Yeah,
finalize.
I can expand on that a little bit too, Dave. For those of you that weren't part of the CIP process, that's kind of a smaller committee. But a lot of the materials that I presented there really built out, as Dave touched on, kind of more of a 10-year kind of general obligation type note, which is historically what we've seen for just kind of standard projects. Right now, what we're calling for, at least what I'm calling for based on the model we have right now using 10-year debt issues, is about a $2.6 million needed reduction in the 22 CIP, and then a $2.7 million reduction needed in the 2024 CIP. So we're kind of asking the body if this is something you would like us to take back, like me to take back to Dave, and kind of isolate some of the larger projects, like he mentioned, the Whitewater Park, some of the streets projects, potentially a fire truck, things like that, and really move those out to like 20-year bonds, longer term issues, and see what that does to this plan and see what's kind of doable. And you don't have to decide now. We can maybe talk about it while we're going through the other budget stuff after Dave's done, but that's just something for you to kind of chew on as we're going through the rest of this, to see if you want us to take that back and look at that and see what that looks like.
Okay, you ready for me to keep going, Jamin?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't see your face, so I'm not sure if you're ready for me to jump back in or not. So this page would be where we've taken that $2 to $3 million, basically average of $3 million of projects a year, and we've sized them for an estimated of how much of the size of that debt issue might be. And these are estimates, just like when we come to you for the pre-sale, where we have a certain amount, we kind of guess at what bond counsel is going to give you. So, and the underwriter amount, we always put in at what we feel is the maximum they will take. In this market, they don't take that much, so we don't want to short that in the estimates, but on sale day, they typically trim that back, and that's one way that they are able to win the bid, by reducing their costs. So the projects that, and I don't have a list of projects, but the project total amounts are what Jamin provided me, and so we sized these issues for each year based on those numbers. So we kind of wanted to just address a couple policies that you have in place that are more Moody's oriented. I think if I drive anything home tonight, it is how do we look to that outside rating agency. So the first thing is that we will not increase the debt service tax rate by more than 2%. So we do have, based on that last chart with the tax rate, we do have an increase in 2022 of about 4%. But the reason for that is because we are introducing the TID levy support for those underperforming TIDs. But like I said, that revenue source is looked upon so much more favorably than the advances are, that if we can implement that and help those TIDs out until they have some growth and are able to maybe sustain their own obligations, that's a great idea. Annual general obligation debt payments should aim to not exceed 40% of the total budgeted tax levy expenditures. When we get to the general fund, you'll see where I'm calculating that out. As of this last week, the amount that the 21 budget shows is that you're at 36%, so you're under that policy. And then the last one is really the state debt limit, the debt capacity policy. So you've probably heard me say this enough times in the last year, but you can borrow up to 5% of your equalized value. And so let's see, actually, I can probably tell you what that is. We'll get to that page, but well, actually, I don't have that number. We put it into pictures so it wouldn't be so numerical. But your policy says that you'll be at 4%. So your basically policy says that you will only use 80% of that state statute debt limit. Right now, you're at a debt limit of your usage is about 2.89%, so you're more like 60% or a little bit above that. I think when you look at this, the one thing that you should get out of this presentation as well is that budget time is a great time to look at your policies and see if they still mean anything. And I think that if you looked at this policy on the debt limit, that it's something that you may want to adjust, because 80% is 5% more than I ever recommend to my other clients. But I don't think you need to use that much. I think if you look at the graph that we'll be coming up on soon, that you might be able to trim that back. And as you go forward and have this plan working out, you may even be able to reduce it more. But I think this is one that you may want to look at as part of this budget process. So another really small number schedule, but the left side of the schedule is basically a condensed version of that base case that I showed you a couple slides ago. Then the pink section is really the 5 years of projects. So all those levy sizes that I showed you, we have scheduled out how that should fit to give us a flexible tax rate. The other thing that Jamin and I added is another 5 years on top of that, because we wanted to see a longer term look at the levy change. So we added 5 more years of $3 million projects just to kind of get a longer look and give you a flavor for what we were thinking here. So out of that amount that we're borrowing, we have abatements because the stormwater utility is going to potentially borrow some money. They will pay for their own debt. And then we're down to how much of the new debt would be paid by the tax levy. The next column is the debt service levy. We have that increasing by $100,000 a year. There's 2 ways to approach this. And when we started out, I was approaching it the way that I typically do, where we kind of aim at a certain tax rate, and then we start to, well, for the years that we have projects identified, we hold that flat, and then we come down when we get to, after the years where the projects are. So right now you can see we have 10 years worth of projects in here, and then that 11th year we don't have anything, so that's why it starts to drop off. And if we were just showing you a 1-year picture, we would have that top number, and then we'd be dropping off right away for that flexible tax rate. So the way that we approach this is more like what we do in Fitchburg, where we actually aim at a certain levy increase. So the one thing to really know about this tax rate is that it's based on 2% growth and maybe just a little bit of TIF district growth or TIF district closure. So what I did before I came on today is I was like, okay, how do I get this to basically flatten out so that I don't have a tax rate increase at all? And so instead of 2%, I was able to basically flatten this out at about 2.3% growth. So you don't even have to really go up a whole lot to flatten this out. And that 2% right now is hopefully, I want to say unrealistic, because you've done well, but who knows with the world these days, whether everything will stay the same or what will keep going. Some of the economics these days have been kind of surprising, how the markets are doing and how houses are selling. So who knows? Can't really see it from what's going on these days. But if we go up to 2.5%, that rate starts coming down. So we don't need a lot of growth to actually make that rate come down, even though we're adding $100,000 of levy each year, which helps you pay for those projects that you have in your CIP. I told you about that. Okay, and like I said, the 2% growth is what we use, but like I said, the last 5 years you've averaged almost 6. So this tax rate at 6% obviously would come down really fast. So debt limit, and I didn't put in new numbers. I think I killed you with enough numbers on the last schedule, but your policy is 80%. Right now you are at the end of 19, you were at 62%. End of 20, with the projection, you will actually be at about 58%. And you can see, even with adding projects on of $3 million a year, you're coming down pretty smoothly. And so I think this, like I said, I think this is a policy that you could look at and maybe trim off some of that top end. What I did put in here though is a 50% graph. That's an amount that a Wanakee or an Oregon uses. And so you can see that out in the future, depending on what those bigger projects are, that you actually have the capability, if you have smooth projects along the way, that you could maybe even go down to a 50% at some point. But that also depends on what your needs are for infrastructure or your amenities.
Yeah. Dave, just real
Go ahead.
quick, we have some new folks on the council too that weren't around. I wasn't around either, but I want to say back in 17 this was with the Public Works building. I off the top of my head, I don't remember what the existing policy was at that time. I want to say it was 2%. And to fit that Public Works building and then some of the 17 capital projects, that's when the council determined to move it up to the 4%. So it was kind of
really,
yeah, it was kind of a one-time decision to jump it up to the 4%. I think the existing one at the time was pretty restrictive, like you just said, but that's a little history in terms of why it jumped up that much.
Okay. So then the operating projection. So the general fund, as you know, levies for all general property taxes of the city. And then what the general fund does is it transfers money out to those funds that are funded in some part by the levy. So like the library, debt service payments, other things that you have, sick leave, whatever. So then you have a policy in place where the unassigned fund balance will be maintained at a level between 20 and 25% of the general fund budgeted expenditures. And I believe actually it's general fund budget expenditures, which includes the transfers out to all those other funds as well. So as of the end of 19, the city was at about 27%. And you look at that and say you might be over, but you do have some things going on with fund balance right now where, that could, if you were to keep advancing money to the TIF districts instead of using levy support, that'll nip away at that available fund balance. And if your budgets don't have a surplus to them, that won't fill that hole. And so you'll start to use that up. And you don't want to run out of fund balance or cash, basically, is what unassigned fund balance is, because that's one of those measures that Moody's looks at. And one of the things that you also do is they look at a 5-year trend of that. So you want to kind of keep that somewhat healthy as well. So as far as the numbers that are in the 5-year plan, the 2021 budgets are what the city has currently is working with right now. And then for 22 to 25, we use forecast codes, which are on the next page. That they're basically a percent that staff and Ellers discussed, and so they aren't set in stone. They're guesses at what things could be, and so obviously if we were to change a couple of those, we could make the projection look different. But we'll show you how things look using those projected forecast codes. The 2020 budget obviously is impacted by the COVID pandemic. Staff said that the 2021 budget was budgeted as if it was going to be a normal year. We know that's probably not going to be true, at least for a while. So there is a contingency that is planned for the general fund to account for some of those costs you have to take on because of that extra care that you have to have with this fine virus that we're living with. So these are the forecast codes. Basically, we took your general fund trial balance, so every little detail account, and we assigned a category to it. And so for wages or commodities, which is your supplies and stuff, we lumped these codes based on what those were. There are cases where we knew something was going to change differently than just the code, and so staff did review some of those lines and make some manual adjustments to those lines to have them be a little bit more in line with what was going to happen. So as we applied these codes to the general fund, we get a schedule that looks like this. 2020 staff projected out where we think we're going to end, potentially with a little bit of a surplus. The 21 budget, like I said, is what the 21 column is, and then you can see that that those forecast codes kind of kick in. But we aren't really jumping up revenues, which in a municipality, it's not very easy to increase your revenues. And so really what takes the brunt of the expenditure increases is that levy line. And that levy looks smaller than you're normally used to, and because that levy line does not include the debt service fund, because we accounted for that in a different line. And you'll see where that gets pulled back in when I show you the final tax levy graph. The other thing that's important on this line is your policy for unassigned fund balance. I believe, what was it at 27% at the end of 19, Jamin? And so
Yeah.
based on the projection, then pulling that debt service levy down here back in, able to take a look at that. It looks like we're at around 35, 34, 33%. You know, that's really why that's going down, is because these advances that we have still in the TIF districts, even though we're doing levy support, there's still some increase in those advances. And so it nips away at it a little bit until we start finally seeing some reduction in advances. And that's where this starts to pop back up. So, you know, if these are real, if we're more at 27% and these advances are climbing, you can see where you could nip away and start getting back down to that 20 to 25 range. And if things keep going south on as far as the cash flow of those TIF districts, it's possible that you'd be below that 20% if we didn't do something to help fix that. This is just a graph that shows you the breakout of the general fund balance over the next 5 years. Pretty stable. You know, there's a little difference in the non-spendable line, and non-spendable is where advances go, or prepaid items. And what that means is we have already sent the cash somewhere. It's not available for our use. And in the case of the TIF districts, we gave them money to be able to pay their bills because they couldn't. On a prepaid item, we pay that money out in December, but it's for the next budget, but it's not there at the end of the year in cash. So that's why it's not, that's why it's non-spendable. The green line is really your unassigned. And then the blue is mostly, I believe it's the pilot for the utilities, as well as some equity in your insurance company that you're involved in. Do you want to add anything to that, Jamin?
I'll just touch quickly on kind of the internal calculation too, in terms of why Eller's numbers look a little bit higher on the previous slide in terms of 35, 34%, things like that. We actually kind of have an internal policy too, where we pull in things like the Opera House, the RDA, the Economic Development Fund, these types of funds that are carrying basically negative unreserved fund balances. So the 35% is probably a little bit inflated compared to where we'll actually be internally. And then you also have the auditors who look at it a little bit differently, and that's a completely different number, but we kind of live and die by our internal policy, which is why you see some variances there. I think it still paints the same picture in terms of, you know, seeing it notch down over the next few years, but that's why there's a variance there.
Jamin, if you want, just throw me those numbers and then I'll incorporate that in the final.
Okay, sure.
Then, you know, I'd rather be more in line with what you're showing. That makes more sense.
I can do that.
And then levy limits, we tried to make this not be a whole bunch of numbers as well. The top green line, where that is the maximum amount that you could levy under levy limits. That's a combination of the operating section, which is your blue section. And that blue section only goes up by net new construction. And for 2021 budget, your net new construction is, you know, just a little over 1.8%, which means you're not going to grow your levy a whole heck of a lot. They really do hold you down quite a bit. The other thing is the red section, and that is the debt adjustment. And so general obligation debt is outside of the levy limit. And so when you do your projects and you have debt service payments that you have to make, that's an amount that gets added to a line on the levy limit sheet and allows your levy to be over that blue section. Now, right now, the city is in a really good spot, and it's where we like to see our clients, where some of the blue is actually covering some of that debt adjustment. So it actually doesn't even get put on the line for debt adjustment. We're actually covering some of our debt without having to add that. So what you can see here, though, is as the debt the blue section increases, because we're using more of the levy for operating, that green section, that maximum amount, is starting to narrow. And as that narrows, you have less flexibility. So, this is a projection. And as my old boss used to say, projections are always wrong. So when you go to your budgets in those future years, you're going to make adjustments, and we're hopefully going to maintain a little bit more of a gap than that narrowing. But as being a forecast, there's a lot of things that could go into this, and we could change some of our assumptions to make that look differently anyways. But it gives you kind of an idea that if you don't take a look at things carefully on an annual basis, that some of that flexibility can go away. Now, this is the expenditure restraint budget worksheet, and really the part that I'll direct your attention to is basically on the bottom. The yellow items up above calculate that very bottom number, and we have really conservative numbers in there. Although this year's DOR CPI, the amount that the DOR will let you go up because of inflation, is actually really low based on how they calculate it. And then net new construction, you only get 60% of that. And so we're really being conservative. I think we're using 1.5% on the future years for net new construction for both levy limits and expenditure restraint. So we really have a really low factor there. I mean, it's possible that it could be that low. And then based on how we're projecting out the expenditures, you can see it's possible in a couple of years where you might not make it. But like I said, you're going to go through your budget process, and I would say that will actually not be true, or you have good reasons why you won't make it. So it's something that's one of the pressure points that we kind of want to alert you to, is that it's possible in 23 that you may have to look for alternative revenues, or how do we keep our expenditures down. But as we update this on an annual basis, it'll become more clear whether that year is going to be more of a problem than it shows right now. So, and then this is the overall tax rate graph that once we pull the operating, the newly introduced TID levy support, the existing debt payments that we have already going into 2021, and then how the new debt with the plan, how we pulled in certain amount of projects, how that comes on, that all goes into this graph. And as I said, right now we have this going up a little bit for debt. If I took out the operating and pretty much if I take out the operating, the debt service is somewhat flat, and this is using 2% growth. If I increase that, I start to get that graph to go, either flat or start going down. So growth definitely has a major impact on how you spread that tax levy dollar. So the way we want this to look is we'd like it to be flat if we can, but what you use for a growth rate will make this graph change. And I think based on the plan that's in here right now, if that is something that is reasonable to the city council, that this is a good looking graph as far as the tax rate. Jamin, you have anything on that?
No, I mean, it is what it is. We were somewhat conservative on the growth, but for 21, we actually did see under 2% growth. So it's kind of goofy. Dave is spot on. Our past few years have been, we've been growing at a pretty good clip, but 21, we took a hit and only had about 1.9% growth or something like that. And obviously with the ongoing pandemic, we had to approach this on a conservative basis. Yeah, other than that, it is what it is. It's kind of what we planned for. And, you touched on it. We'll take this tool and adjust it every single year as actual information becomes available.
Yeah, and the section you were kind of referring to with the 1.9% is really your operating part. The other parts of the tax rate are geared towards what you really grew. So, 2% I still think is under what you had for equalized value growth this year as a whole city, right? Outside of the net new construction, the equalized value went up more than 2%, didn't it?
Oh, it was actually 1.93%. Yeah. a goofy year. There's some big commercial adjustments and things like that. So we don't anticipate that
Oh, yep.
continuing.
Okay.
But yeah, so it was kind of a goofy year. You know, but again, based on what we're seeing, is it going to be 2%? No, it'll probably be higher. Will it be 6%? Probably not. Probably be in the middle somewhere.
Yep. So then the next section that we wanted to present tonight is the tax increment districts. As you know, you have 6 open tax districts right now. Actually, it's probably 5 if you're being technical. One of the, it says 2 city TIDs could potentially close during the forecast period. Actually, one TID 3 is closed. You are keeping that open 1 more year for the affordable housing program. And then that TID 3 value and some of the ability to raise the levy and use that value for you know, the other taxing districts comes on in 2023. 2022?
Yeah, it'll be the 21 value for the 22 budget.
22, yep. When I said that, I went, nope, it's not 23. So the next couple pages will just quickly go through the cash flows, some of the things that are going on in each of the districts, just to kind of give you a flavor of what's been going on. So TIF 3, Industrial Park North, like we said, you did close it this year. It created $23 million in increment value over its life. The final tax increment received by TID 3 is about, you know, it's a little over 500,000 will be used for the affordable housing program. And as a result of the closure, you can anticipate a cash inflow of about $130,000 from that closure. And actually, don't you end up, if I remember correctly on the cash flow, that's a 2020 item, isn't it? Won't you get that $130,000 in 2020?
Nope, it'll be 2021.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I thought that when they did the closeout audit that you distribute everything that's available this year.
Yeah, they're not doing the closeout audit till next year though.
Oh, okay.
Because normally they would have, but due to the extension for the affordable housing, they have to wait until all of that's done. Because we will receive some personal property aid and things.
Okay. As well as the 130,000, we're going to have some value coming onto the tax rolls of about 23 million. Based on how the state does the calculation, that will only amount to about $65,000 of new taxes. They actually only let you have half of the value, which is one of the ways that they give tax relief. So the cash flow, and I'll go through this one more detailed. It's smaller, obviously, because it's almost closed, but I'll just kind of show you how you read it. And then when we get to the other ones, I won't go through them quite as detailed. But what we have on that top line is the amounts in the audit. So that line agrees to what your audit report said. We have a forecast that isn't on, we didn't include, but that calculates that tax increment column. And so that's how much money that you'll receive from 19 through 21. Typically, the TIF districts get some money from the Department of Revenue for exempt computer aid or personal property aid. And in other TIF districts, there's some other things like lot sales or something like that. But that's what the revenues are here. Typically, there's some debt service to pay out. This one has its last debt payments this year. And then there's a distribution, which probably should be on the next line down to the other districts for the amounts that are available to distribute. And then you're keeping this district open 1 more year. You'll collect about $520,000, and that's the amount that'll go in your affordable housing. TID 4, the expenditure period will close on March 23rd of 2021. Because that's coming up, the city has chose to fund approximately $1 million in downtown improvements, as well as put some money into the revolving loan fund. Since the creation of the TID, nearly $8 million has been added to the tax roll. That should say TID number 4 is anticipated to close in 2025. But depending on, what you actually do before March 23rd of 2021, it's possible that you would, maybe not need to stay open that long. It's something that you can consider as you go forward, because when you look at the cash flow, which reads the same way as the last one, you actually don't have a deficit here, and your debt is paid off during 2020. So if there isn't a need, that this district could close earlier, and then you could take advantage of that closure as well, and potentially have another distribution that the general fund or one of the city funds could take advantage of. So that's something to kind of keep in your back pocket. Or the other thing would be to do another affordable housing year on this as well.
I had a quick question about that. Would it be possible, or would it be an option to consider using that as a loaner until it actually closed?
Seems to me that this one is not a donor. It's not donor capable.
Okay.
I think you can't do it after the expenditure period either.
After the 5 years before it closes?
Well, if you were to amend, if this one could donate and you were to amend it before the expenditure period ended, you'd be able to do that donation, because in other cases where TIF districts are donating, those donations can continue to go until the districts close.
I'm just wondering if that would help for some of the other districts that are struggling, that we're, potentially we're putting on the tax roll. And I don't know if there's a relationship there or not.
I don't have my TIF grid in front of me, but I'll confirm this, Mayor, but I kind of feel like this is a district that isn't capable of donating.
Yeah, if you want to just check on that, we don't need an answer
check on
tonight.
that, because I would have thought we would have built this into that already. So
Okay.
let's see. Okay. TID number 5 is the railroad corridor, created in 2010. There was an amendment in 2018 that split out a chunk to TID 8. Since the creation, there's been about 2.3 million in increment that's been created. Back before that amendment, though, there was a significant decrement, loss of value, and because of some of the projects were undertaken, the amount of debt that's in place isn't really being funded well. So because of that, staff is anticipating providing less levy support beginning in 2022 through 2027. If there was some growth in this district, it's possible that you wouldn't need as much levy support, but in this plan, we have projected about $425,000 of levy support for this district to try to avoid advancing any more money. As you can see, we do have an advance from the general fund of $760,000 at this point. So same thing with this district. The audit is the top line. The increment is what we've calculated. We haven't projected any growth in here at this point. I think we were just being conservative. Hopefully you will get something going in there. Grants are the monies from the Department of Revenue for exempt computer aid and personal property aid. The levy support is new in here. That wasn't in the one that we went through. Otherwise, these are fairly standard costs, and you can see we've got this red area, which is really your fund balance or your advance that's in place. So when we amended this district back in 2018, we did add 3 years of extension, which was allowed, and so you've added 3 years to collect another 150 or 1,000 or so, but without any further growth. And with levy support, this district still could close with a deficit, and that means the taxpayers would probably have to fund that deficit. TID 6, the Business Park North expansion, was created in 2015. You entered into agreement with a developer which required the city to complete some infrastructure improvements. Subsequent to the city doing the borrowing for those projects, the developer declared bankruptcy, and it's possible that they may not honor their responsibility as outlined in the agreement. So, that's obviously unfortunate if that happens. There was a little bit of activity, but the district has only created about 1.1 million in increments in 2015 while incurring, 3.1 million in debt. As a result of what's been going on there, staff is requesting levy support start in 2021 and go through 2029. Same thing, if we have some growth that could be diminished, but at this point, with how things look in the projections right now, we may need 2,225,000 of levy support over those years. In this district, we do not have an extension in place, so it's possible that you could go at least 3 years. I think it's only 3 years because this was created in 15, where you could add 3 years to try to collect more levy from that. But is this the one, Jamin, that only has like 5,000 of increment each year?
It's got, yeah, it has about 1 million right now. And just
but
for
the annual
councils.
taxes are like $5,000, aren't they?
Yeah, I think it's like 25,000 something. It's not much. This is the one that NAFA's in.
Okay. So that, if we get out, as we go forward, hopefully we'll get some growth, and maybe, if we, if necessary, you could add 3 years to it. I don't think that you're early enough on that maybe that wouldn't be necessary, but it's an option. And as of the end of 19, we had an advance of about 140,000 from the general fund. So audit is the gray line. We've got the increment that we forecasted out. We've got the levy support in here for this TIF district. We do project that maybe we'll get some of that levy support back. We'd like to do the whole amount, but even with a 3-year extension, we fall about $1 million short on paying the taxpayers back for this levy support. So, growth in this one would do wonders to help, maybe reduce this, or at least let the taxpayers get the levy support back. TID 7, created in 2015 as a mixed use district. In that short time, it's created about 34 million in increment value. We amended it in 2020 to incorporate the residential phase. In 2018, we incurred about $4 million of debt for that, or I think it was probably prior to that, but I think did we refund it in 18?
Yeah, they just did some bond anticipation notes.
Okay. So we had bond anticipation notes, and then in 18, we refunded that into permanent financing. So the new phase has the MRO in place of a large borrowing at this point. And so some of the risk has been moved to the developer. The city does obviously have some infrastructure that they will be paying for, but at least you were able to shift some of that over to the developer. So as we showed you during the amendment phase, this district has really healthy tax increment projected. As long as that residential gets going, this would obviously lead to some pretty good growth in that increment. The debt won't be paid off until 2034. You may add some in the future, although I think we were going to finance that capital expenditure. So I take back that we have a future borrowing on this one, because we were depending on the fund balance to be able to fund those capital improvements. So that does help quite a bit as far as this goes. And if all goes, if development occurs as projected in the amendment, and you accomplish all the projects that you want to that you have in the project plan, we're hoping that this one will be closed around 2028. TIF number 8 is the riverfront. It was created in 2018 as a result of the 2018 TID number 5 amendment, where you split off some of that district into TID 8. Since that creation, you've added approximately 250,000 in increment value. It's currently carrying a significant amount of debt. There are discussions ongoing with potential developers. However, it isn't expected that much growth will happen in the near term to start paying some of that debt. As a result of that lack of cash flow, there is anticipation that levy support would be needed from about 2021 through 2029. Future growth, obviously, like we talked about before, would obviously help this and maybe reduce the levy support. But at this point, that's projected to be about 980,000. The advance at the end of the year for this TID from the general fund was $144,000. So this one, same thing. We have this is the one I was thinking of, Jamin, where we have only $5,000 of tax increment. And so the levy support is built into here. We've got debt that we still need to pay, and we just have a growing deficit fund balance in this one. We don't have the extension built onto this one, but it would obviously, if you don't have growth, it might be a consideration in the future, long ways in the future, but hopefully you'll get the growth you need here. So this is just a graph that we put together that shows the projected levy support. The orange bar is TID 6, which is the one that is in the most dire need of it. But you can see that TID 5 and TID 8 also have some need to help them become, a little less dependent on the general fund's fund balance for paying for their bills. And then as far as the advances outstanding at the end of 19, the advance to TIF 5 is the bigger one, over 700,000, and the other two are smaller. But as we were showing you in the cash flows, those appear to be ones that will grow a little bit as we go forward. And then just now that we're at the end of the TIF districts, did you have anything you wanted to add, Jamin?
No, that's about it. We just wanted to stress the TIF 5, 6, and 8 and the financial status of those right now. It really limits what we can do in terms of CIP, potential future referendums, things like that. We had to forecast these as worst case scenario just to get a plan out there, because otherwise you're just honestly guessing. I mean, a forecast is a guess anyway, but then you're truly guessing at what kind of potential growth could happen out there. Things will change. It looks ugly right now, but things will change. We'll get growth, we'll get increment, we'll get revenue there. But right now we had to forecast it this way.
So then just to wrap things up, the city has approved financial policies in the past for various financial areas, and we recommend that you take a look at those policies on an annual basis. A lot of the ones that you have in place are, the fund balance policy is pretty right in line with a lot of places that have a policy. That was the one I had at Wanakee, so that was very familiar seeing those numbers. As we talked about in all parts of the project or in the plan, increased growth gives you flexibility and has a major positive impact on how much the rate is, because you'll have if you have more growth, you have places that you can spread that levy, and it also helps your levy limit to have a bigger growth on that operating levy limit line to let you fund your operations and growth in services that you need in a growing community. As I talked about, levy limits can only increase by net new construction. So the current plan shows that narrowing, that green part that I was talking about. And so when you're doing your annual budgets, you're obviously going to have a sharp pencil, and you're going to find ways to make your budget work. If you run into trouble where that isn't possible, there are plenty of communities that have had to figure out where can we get more revenue from. There are alternative revenue sources. Many people would say they're just other taxes, but in some cases with levy limits in place, you got to do what you got to do. And if alternative revenue sources aren't what excites you, then you kind of have to look at your services and say, what are we willing to give up so that we can cut our expenditures and be able to make compliance with those levy limit rules. The plan is going to help you establish a stable debt plan and help you look at the projects you want to do and help you get those projects done. You may need to move things around if you decide that you want to keep your 10-year debt repayment with notes. If there's other projects that you really do want to do, like some of the things that if you're interested in having us update this, it could be that we might need to look at those to see if we need a longer repayment period. So it's something that we can look at, but what we'll do in the process is make sure that we keep that tax rate stable so that you don't have taxpayers wondering why their taxes are going up. They don't care if they go down, but they don't want to see them going up. So continue to look at your developer financing and make sure you're shifting as much risk to the developers as you can. And my overall statement to you guys is you're a AA2. You're a smaller value type of a municipality, but you have a great bond rating. And if you look at your metrics, you're pretty healthy. And I think if you take good care of those metrics and always have your eye on how they are impacted by what you do, we can make sure that you stay at that AA2. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, or maybe you're tired of hearing me talk. One of the two.
I have one, if I could. Regina, is that okay?
Absolutely. Go ahead,
I have
Sid.
an observation and a question. First of all, the observation is that you had mentioned the Whitewater Park. We have not made a decision about that, as far as I know. So you would mention that early on. That's going to be an interesting decision that we have to make on that one, because that's not a revenue producer for us at all. Then the second, that's an observation. The other is we had an acquisition of a building, which now is our city hall. And are you taking into account anything about that essentially a donation that we got for that city hall? I mean, our capital has increased just with the acquisition of a building, which was essentially a gift.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the only thing that donation would do for you is would increase operating costs, because you obviously have to keep it up. But as far as how it impacts the plan, it's a thing in the past, and we're looking forward, and so that item isn't actually in what we projected.
Okay.
So
It's
any other
great,
questions?
great that they did that. That's awesome.
I had one other question, Dave, if you want to entertain one.
Sure.
What would be, I've been trying to do sort of a sliding calculation in order to figure out if there is kind of a golden number that you can get in a city with net new construction that would not trigger any of the penalties that would be put in by the levy limits at all. Is there a percentage that should be aimed for, or that would kind of maximize the benefits versus having to incur any of the penalty?
Well, I think the levy limit even is more restrictive than that. I believe that when it comes to, and I don't have it up in front of me, but I think, the CPI is one thing, but I think your net new construction number, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, can exceed 2%. So I think you're capped even further, even if you grow a lot.
Okay.
Which
is that
isn't
something
fair.
like?
Which isn't
is
fair.
that something like Fitchburg is seeing when you were comparing their large growth versus others?
I don't. They're so big that I think their growth isn't. I was just gonna Google the expenditure restraint quick, because I wanted to make sure what I was saying to you.
Yeah, it's 2%.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think they do have issues with making things fit, and I think that Misty, when she budgets, is always, it has that in front of the council's eyes as far as how much they can go up, because she's very, very attentive to detail and really knows her stuff. And I know that when we do the financial management plan presentation to their council, that is an item that she's always pointing out to them when we do that presentation.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Dave, I guess, when you were talking about switching to bonds for the Whitewater Park, I guess I would like to see that. I mean, just in case, we're still writing grants and hoping that they come through next year. That would take the big chunk out of it, but just in case that we don't get it, it would be nice to know what our options are.
And I'm sorry that I picked on that one. I think Jamin said there was a couple other bigger items that also got added to the CIP. But yeah, if we're getting some bigger projects, Jamin, did you tell me one of the years was maybe 6.6 million or something? Am I making that up?
Yeah, there's actually a couple big years, and I think, probably to make it worthwhile and smooth things out as best we can, to look at the CIP as a whole, we'd have to pull some other projects out too, because, like the $2.6 million recommended reduction that I'm saying in 22 isn't all Whitewater Park. So we'd have to kind of isolate some other projects that would qualify for bonds too and build those in. So we'll take a look at it. I can summarize the CIP for Dave, and we can start picking apart what would maybe make sense to go into bonds and what makes sense to go into 10-year notes.
And the one thing, Jamin, and I think you can tell me if I'm wrong on this one, but we had a issue, I want to say spring of 19, where we jammed a really large borrowing into a 10-year repayment, and it really kind of stung the city's finances as far as the tax rate. It was quite a big hit to have those kind of big payments hit you in a 10-year payment area. So it's something that we should be modeling out what's best for basically your taxpayers, because shoving something into 10 years when it probably belonged at 15 to 20 doesn't do them any favors.
Yeah. And
Jamin, was that Public Works building?
No, the bad part about that is a big chunk of that was the TIF 6 borrowing. That now we're seeing the impacts of NAFA and limited growth out there. So hindsight's 2020 on that one. The best we can do is I think we have a good plan now, but we can take it back and look at what adjustments can we make.
Right.
We're really creating this to keep ourselves out of trouble. It's going to change, but this is a way that we keep ourselves from not getting in trouble too.
Sounds good. Does anybody else have any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you.
It was a great presentation.
Appreciate it.
Lots to kind of make my head spin.
That's what numbers do. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave.
And now we go on to the City of Stoughton operating budget summary. Jamin, obviously that's you.
All right. Get this up here. Okay. So let me just hide everybody here so I can see what I'm looking at. Okay, so a lot of the information I'm going to go through in this PowerPoint, we'll kind of touch on what Dave already talked about. So this really won't take very long. I did kind of limit the departmental presentations to just a few tonight as well. Nothing, too involved until we get to the Opera House, obviously. But it's that time of year, it's committee of the whole. So, these do take time. But we'll just kind of go through the presentation, similar to past years, just go ahead and interrupt me, but I'll just kind of touch on the high level information. And then we'll go from there into the departmental budgets. So quick and dirty, here's the presentation schedule. Obviously, Dave just went through the FMP operating budget overviews now, and then we'll go through the departments as listed. Second meeting on the 22nd, and then the third one on the 29th, would just kind of to review any changes that we make throughout the first two meetings, and then we'll finalize the operating budget. Generally, I think the October 22nd and the October 29th one are generally a little bit shorter. than the first one because we do kind of have to get everybody back up to speed and touch on some historical things and everything like that. So I appreciate all the patience. So driving factors for this year's budget, besides pandemic, obviously, we'll touch on that in just more of a conversation format. But right now we do have a placeholder of a 2% wage increase that's factoring in for union and non-union. A 2.5% increase in health insurance premiums. Obviously the Opera House cancellation / uncertainty, and we'll dive into that in some pretty good detail at the end of the meeting. As Dave touched on, some struggling TIF districts, TIFs 5, 6, and 8, we're looking at levy support totaling $149,000, give or take. Net new construction was 1.837. That's great this year. Results in about $135,000 increase to the base tax levy. If you think about the operating levy of, $6.2 million or whatever it is, 135,000 isn't that big of a jump, but it's better than past years that we've seen. We will be seeing the $130,000 cash inflow from TIF 3, so that's good news. Hopefully everybody's been keeping up to speed on the personnel committee meetings that they've had, the special ones to go through the position requests. They did recommend public works position. We'll talk about that a little bit. Maybe not so much tonight, but maybe when Brett presents on the 22nd, but I just wanted to make everybody aware that that position was proposed in the packet. All of that information is available too if you want to read through them. For the department heads that are presenting tonight, we'll touch on their requests. I wasn't involved in that at all, but they can at least speak to them and give their take on why the positions are needed. Obviously, the ongoing pandemic has created a significant amount of uncertainty. Dave touched on this as well. We have budgeted as a normal year, but we all know that it will be anything but a normal year. We just don't know how long it's going to be. Could be March, could be April, could be August before we get back to normal. Who knows? As we work through this process, just a couple things I want the committee of the whole to kind of keep in the back of their minds. Think about the contingency amount, and we'll touch on that later in terms of what I put in there for an amount, but just think about where that's at. Keep that in the back of your mind if you want to increase it, decrease it, and what have you. I would like some input on the final wage increases. We'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the rest of the presentation. And just kind of my little caveat here with anything in this budget, we just need to be prepared to reverse course in 21 in relation to any decision that we make for the 21 budget, obviously just due to the pandemic. Right now state aids appear to be untouched, but that could change very quickly come 22. They could always amend their budget for 21 and make changes. I think they're planning on revisiting it again in February. So we're just not 100% certain right now. Everything seems as if it's going to be okay, but again, 2020 has brought a lot of surprises, and I imagine 21 will bring some surprises as well. So just kind of keep all of that in the back of your mind in terms of just the amount of uncertainty that we have going into 21. Some outstanding items. So again, determine the contingency amount or at least finalize it. I'm kind of tasking the committee of the whole with that. Final wage increase, tasking committee of the whole with that, and then confirm the additional staffing request approved by personnel committee. We are still waiting on the final decision for the school resource officer. I have reduced that revenue for now. We just don't know if we should reduce it more. I basically cut it in half, assuming nothing is going to happen first semester. But we don't know if second semester is going to fall into place as well. So we're still waiting on that. There is a decision pending on some potential additional connecting highway aids, kind of in the range of $25,000 to $28,000. Probably likely won't see that till 22. But if we get news, I'll build that into the budget if we do know that's coming in 21. There is a possibility that the union contract won't be completed by November 10th. That makes things a little hairy going into the year. So again, we may just have to be ready to make some adjustments after the budget is finalized. But who knows, maybe they'll get it done. But at this point, I probably won't count on it since we're a month out. The expenditure restraint parameters, we just have to determine that final CPI number. Should be getting that shortly, so I'll touch on that a little bit later too. We will finalize the fire billing amounts to the townships. once the budget is kind of confirmed and close to finalized, we're meeting with the townships next week, so we'll get their take on it as well. And then we are waiting on the final statement of assessment from the DOR, and that will really kind of determine the final mill rate. So just a few things outstanding, and you know, again, kind of three big things that the committee of the whole needs to keep in the back of their mind as we work through this process. Again, some more numbers for you. Let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. I'm not going to touch on this in too much detail because we do get into these in detail as we move through the presentation. But first column number here is the 2021 budget, and then 2020 adopted budget is on the right hand side here. Obviously, you can see the big jump here is in the operations levy. That's about $133,000. That's obviously related to the net new construction. And then you see the debt service here. This is really only general fund. So if you look at the debt service, this number of 3.284 million, you can see it actually went down from last year. This isn't taking into account the TIF levies because we actually levy that directly to the TIF funds. So in actuality, it's missing about $60,000, give or take, on this number, because that gets levied directly to the TIF districts. Kind of working our way down, I just kind of threw the expenditures into some buckets here. We will actually go through these in pretty significant detail, either in the presentation tonight or as we work through the departmental budgets over the next couple nights. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I did, you know, you can always refer back to it if you have any questions or just want to see a big picture of where the general fund budget is right now. As of right now, and this wasn't even me playing with it, on Sunday, we end up with a bottom line of $28. So it's pretty good. Just a real kind of quick and dirty breakout of where our revenues and expenditures are coming from. Obviously, the 72% is the property taxes. That includes the levy to the property owners, and then the pilots, which is the utilities, Stoughton Housing Authority, Dane County Housing Authority, things like that. Expenditures, you can see the breakdown here. Wages and benefits on the general fund actually make up about 50% of our budget. Debt service is 23%, non-labor is about 18%, and then other makes up about 9% of our overall budget. But as you can see here, debt service and wages, those are the two big numbers. The anticipated levy impact, again, Dave kind of touched on this. We're just looking at equalized value right now. We're seeing a slight bump, but again, it's based on equalized value and does not reflect the actual change in the total mill rate. And we won't know that for a few weeks yet. They started working on that on the 6th. They kind of send it out in waves. In my 2 years here, I've noticed we're always kind of the last ones to find out for some odd reason. But once I find out, I'll incorporate that into the presentations. Mill rate history, you can see here, historical until the very last line, which just says forecasted 2020, because that's the levy, even though we're talking about 2021 budget. The 814 I have here is kind of based on an assumed assessment ratio. I think we will see a drop in our mill rate. I just kind of used an average assessment ratio right now, but again, you can kind of see where things have been going. You can see it historically where you see the mill rate growing. That was kind of the recovery from the housing crash. We're starting to see things drop down beginning in 2016, and that's when kind of we get over the housing crash and the recession that followed, and our values started going up. So you see that mill rate. It's kind of an inverse relationship. As values go up, that mill rate generally goes down. Mill rate history continued. Again, average residential economic increase in 2020 was about 1.7%. I used the average assessment ratio. Forecasted mill rate reduction compared to 19 is about 0.61% reduction. I'm forecasting an average impact to a homeowner of about 1.09%, give or take. We're still waiting on final information. I'll let you know exactly what that number is when we get the final mill rate. We did see some negative adjustments to commercial properties due to the third tier income expense information. There's 3 different tiers that the assessors use. But you can see the 2020 commercial economic change was actually a 2% decrease, and 2019 it was an 8% increase. We didn't see this coming. We had no idea this was coming, and it kind of has an impact on what the overall mill rate is. We're not anticipating this again next year. This was just kind of a one-time adjustment for a number of big businesses because we saw like the SWAC sell some things like that that really kind of changed the existing values that were on some of these properties. I don't anticipate it being like this next year. Expenditure restraint, Dave kind of touched on this, pretty much in the same ballpark. We're at 2.36% right now. I'm anticipating 2.4 allowed. So we have a little bit of wiggle room, about $4,500. Not that we couldn't brush up against that and move some numbers around and make it work, but right now we're pretty much right on in terms of what the expenditure restraint's going to allow us. That expenditure restraint amount equates to about $230-some thousand from the state if we meet that. So it is pretty important to meet it. It'd be great if we didn't have to rely on the expenditure restraint money from the state, but right now we do. General fund operating revenue summary. Again, I'm not going to go through this in any amount of detail because we kind of touch on it later on. I'll touch on the big ones though. First line, obviously, we went through the taxes. 130,000 of that increase is related to the net new construction, 135,000. And then about a $60,000 decrease in debt service. But again, we are levying to the TIFs as well, which isn't incorporated in here. The other financing sources, you can see the 182,000, that's up from last year. That reflects the $130,000 cash inflow from TIF 3 once we terminate that. Then really there wasn't any major fluctuations until we kind of get down into the intergovernmental charges for services and miscellaneous revenues. This $82,000 here towards the bottom of intergovernmental charges for services. In 19, we didn't charge EMS an admin fee because we basically netted whatever transfer we were going to give them as a subsidy. EMS has since paid off its debt, no longer requires a subsidy from the city, and now we've basically implemented the admin fee back to them. So that's what that jump is. And then the miscellaneous revenue, the biggest change here is interest income. We're not seeing anything. I think I got a statement from Wells Fargo on the utility side. I think we're getting like 0.01% right now on some of our accounts. We do have some things tied up long term, but again, we like to stay as liquid as we possibly can. So that we did decrease that number quite a bit without knowing what's going to happen. Kind of an easier look at what our historicals have done. 18 actual starts on the left here, and it kind of works its way through 19 actual, 2020 budget, 2021 budget. The orange line is the taxes for the operations. You can see it just kind of a steady increase, slow but steady. Debt service, same thing. We did see a big jump in 19 from some of the 17 and 18 debt issuances that we had. But then 20 and 21, we really tried to kind of slow that increase down as much as we possibly could. And I think we've achieved that. And then the other big jump is kind of the big change you'll kind of see is this blue line, which is the other. You can see in 18 and 19, it was up there pretty significantly. The 20 budgets and the 21 budgets are down a little bit, but that really, again, has to do with the interest income. There was a TIF 3 transfer payback that's reflected in the actual 19 numbers. And then franchise fees kind of went back and forth between some are actually being paid by the communications companies, and the state is actually subsidizing some of those too. So some of it jumped into intergovernmental revenues versus the other revenues. So that's why you see that blue line kind of drop down from the 19 actual to the 20, 20, and 21 budgets. The yellow line here, refuse, you can see we had that actual in 18 and 19. That's because we had that budgeted in the general fund. We rubbed up against our expenditure restraint last year, so we decided just to create a separate fund for refuse so we can make the expenditure restraint. So that's why that yellow line is non-existent in 20 and 21. General fund operating expense, again, just kind of give you an idea of what we've been doing. This doesn't include debt service. This is everything else outside of debt service. You can see, steady climb, but 21 budget, a little bit of jump, but not significantly. General fund non-labor summary, really not going to touch on this at all because we get through this. You can see this is just broken down by departmental. This is non-labor benefits, insurance, things like that, just truly kind of direct costs, if you will. We still have about a 2.4% increase. This doesn't include a piece, and I'll tell you why when we get to the finance department budgets. But we'll go through this in detail as we work through the individual departmental budgets as well. But again, it's just kind of here for your reference back in one easy spot if you want to see it. 2021 non-labor summary. The top graph is kind of the historical general fund non-labor analysis. So we have 17 actual on the left side, and then it works its way across to 18 actual, 19 actual, and then the 2020 and 2021 budget. So you can see where the fluctuations had occurred historically. 19, we actually did see a decrease in non-labor. And then you can see with the 2020 budget, we adjusted the budget to kind of reflect what was actually happening there. And then we were able to kind of start ticking it back up in 2021. The bottom number here kind of shows you historical actuals to budget. 2016, you can see we were under budget by about $114,000 in non-labor. 17 and 18 looked really good. 19, we were under budget by about $107,000. Again, that's why you see up above why we decreased the 2020 budget the way we did to kind of catch up for that. You can think of these costs as kind of what the individual department heads are responsible for budgeting on their end. Finance, HR, we really focus on wages, benefits, health insurance, things like that. And then the department heads really kind of focus on what the actual direct costs for their departments will be. And this includes myself as well. I'm responsible for a number of budgets in here as well. But you can see in 19, we did, you can think of this as kind of leaving some money on the table, if you will. So we tried to adjust it in the 2020 budget. So this is 2021 general fund wage, benefits, and insurance summary. The top is really just a condensed version, labor, benefits, health, and dental. And then we kind of break down the different categories we have here. I'm not going to touch on this at all. We'll go through this in detail in the following slides, and then you'll have another crack at it as we work through the departmental budgets. But again, kind of a nice reference for you to go back to see what the historical trends have been versus budget and kind of where we're heading. So this is the wage summary, just very high level. Again, same setup as the other graphs that we had, 17 actual, 18 actual, 19 actual, kind of working your way across. You could see kind of some, nice jumps, 3.5%, 5.9%, 3.5%. We did have about a 4.2% increase budgeted in the 2020 budget, and we're sitting at about 2.2, which falls in line with the 2% that we're suggesting right now, or at least that we have put in right now. General fund wage actual to budgets, you can see 16, 17, and 18. Again, we came in under budget, where you saw in the non-labor where came in over budget, sorry. In the non-labor where we came in under budget on some of those years, you can see in 16, 17, and 18, we were over budget by some pretty significant amounts on the wage side. So 93,000 in 2016, 91,000 in 2018. And in 2019, you can see we were pretty much right on for the wages. This is the benefits. So this would be FICA, WRS, things like that. Again, same setup, nothing too earth shattering. If we look at the 21 budget increase over here on the top right, 2.6, that pretty much mirrors what we're looking at for a wage increase, which makes a lot of sense. There wasn't any real significant changes to the WRS rate, a little jump on the protective services, but that was about it. The bottom line here again, you can see 2016, we were over budget by about $57,000. We were over budget by about $17,000 in 2017, a little bit under in 2018, and then 19,000 over in 2019. So again, in the scheme of things, pretty much right on, in 17, 18, and 19 on that side of things. And then health insurance. So health insurance, you can see where we've seen some big jumps. 2017 is kind of that outlier. That was kind of one of those switches from self-insurance to actual insurance. We see the big jump of 12.4%. But you can see it's kind of been all over the place. 2018, we actually saw a decrease of 1.7%. 19 was an increase of 9%. Last year's budget was increased by about 5%. This year, the actual health and dental insurance budget is really actually going down by just a hair. And we'll kind of touch on this in the departmental budgets as well. But basically what we saw, even though we saw a 2.5% increase in premiums from the insurance company, we saw a number of shifts in elections, certain people going from family to employee plus spouse, things like that. New hires coming on where their predecessor had a family plan, they came on and took single. So that's why we're seeing an actual decrease, even though the premium rates did go up a little bit. The bottom graph here, you can see 2016, 2017, 2018, we were under significant amounts, 106,000 here in 17, but again in 19, we were pretty much right on. So kind of going back a little bit, when we look at the wage pieces, if you focus on the bottom right graphs here and look at where we were in wages, at $1,100 or $1,200 over budget, benefits 19,000 over budget, and health insurance 5,000 under budget. It kind of tells us that the tools that we're using and the work that AJ is doing on the HR side of things is really paying off. And we're getting pretty close to budget to actuals on those side of things. This again is just kind of a big picture look in terms of where we've been. The orange represents wages and benefits actuals to budget. So you can see in 16, we were over by a pretty significant amount on wages and benefits, but at the same time, we were under budget by a significant amount for non-labor. 17 looked pretty good, 18 looked pretty good. Again, 19, we were under on the non-labor budget, but pretty much right on the wages, benefits, and health and dental budgets. So this is just kind of some things that we took into consideration for the 2020 budget and obviously going into the 21 budget. So that's just kind of the high level look in terms of where we're at on budgets and kind of what the big changes were. Again, I just kind of want to, we want to use these as more of a conversation piece than anything. I didn't want to inundate you with a bunch of numbers because we'll go through that in detail on the departmental side of things. But again, some things to keep in mind as we work through this is keep in mind the contingency amount. Right now, I did build in about $100,000 expenditure as a contingency right now, just to cover the unknowns of the pandemic. So just so you know, that contingency amount is set at $100,000. And that's just there as a just in case right now. It's certainly up to you to adjust as you see fit. Keep the wage increase in the back of your mind. Right now, we're showing a bottom line of about $28 without a lot of remaining information to come in. So you can kind of think about how you feel about that wage increase and whether, if you want to reduce it, leave it where it is, or potentially look at increasing it and pulling from the contingency or what have you. And then again, we'll touch on the additional staffing requests from personnel as well. So high level, does anybody have any specific questions on kind of the driving factors and what the overall numbers look like right now?
Sid, is
I
that
do.
you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question, and that is, how did you come up with, you're talking 2% increase overall for wages?
Yes. Yep.
How do you come up with that? And does that go on previous years? I mean,
You want the truth?
yeah.
It's dumb luck. We throw a placeholder in and see where we end up. There is work that AJ does on her side of things, and I also reach out to other area municipalities too. It gets a little dangerous when you try to compare to other municipalities in the area, kind of what Dave was touching on. If you look at the differences between like a Stoughton and a Fitchburg and a Wanakee, but we do have those conversations. And basically what we're seeing, if you look at like a Monona, they right away were at 0%. You look at a Verona, they're at 3%. So we kind of saw this range of 0 to 3%, but for the most part, we're kind of seeing people in the 2% range. And that's where we set it. Obviously, we would have had to adjust accordingly had the budget not worked out and balanced. But in this instance, it worked out.
And
I don't know if AJ's on the line or not.
How does that
I'm sorry,
compare
what's-
last year, Damon?
It was 2% last year as well. Under the union contract last year, though, the union folks got 3%.
And what do
And
you
AJ's on the line too, and she may have some additional input on that as well.
And what do you anticipate for union for this year?
Right now, we put them at 2%.
Going into the union negotiations, working against the city's number, but we are looking at a 2-year contract this year. So, we would try to mirror the same thing, but I have to balance that with the potential of there being a 2-year contract versus going every year with them.
Okay, well, it seems to me that if it's a 3% for union and 2% for non-union, that doesn't quite square with me, actually.
The reason that we went last year stood at 3% was because our officers were not, they were falling behind in regards to wages. So we did bump them up and we used the 3% as the avenue to do so. This year, we're trying to mirror what we have in regards to our office staff, regular city employees versus our union employees.
Just my opinion that it should be pretty close.
Right.
You know, because, you know, that's 1% is a fairly interesting dilemma for, I mean, that adds quite a lot actually to our budget, 1%. So if it's 3% for union and 2% for non, that just doesn't seem to square very well with me.
The goal this year is not to go higher with the union than the regular employees. As I stated before, the reason we did that last year was there was disparity between us and other agencies, and we were struggling to hire.
Okay.
Any other questions on kind of the high level overview? All right. You do have the departmental budgets in your packet. I'm going to go through these kind of on my spreadsheet because I can blow it up and make it a little bit bigger and walk through everything. We'll go through each I'll go through each departmental budget kind of high level, talk about the changes. And then the department heads that are presenting tonight, they're here for any follow-up questions, comments, concerns, what have you. So first up, we have Holly in the clerk's
So Jamie,
budget.
you want to go through them instead of the department heads going through 'em?
What's that?
That you're gonna go through them instead of the department heads explaining things? Or is
Yeah,
that,
well, historically, that's kind of how we've done it. I just touch on the high level things. And then if there's any specific kind of line items that you want to discuss or have questions on, they can chime in and discuss them.
okay,
So clerk, just high level overview, pretty straightforward, not a lot of changes this year. Wages, health and dental and benefits, we basically saw an increase of around 2.3%, which makes sense in terms of what we put into the budget. Non-labor budget really increased marginally about 1.29%, a total increase in Holly's budget of about 1.86%. I did incorporate these graphs. I don't know if they help folks or not, but you can see on the far right-hand side, we have 18 actual, 19 actual, and then 20 budget, 21 budget. Sometimes it's easier just to see a visual in terms of what's actually happening. But if you really kind of work your way to the left here, 19 actual through the budget years, really nothing significant changing here. Holly did have a staffing request out in front of personnel. Like I said, I wasn't involved in those at all. She can certainly speak to that or answer any question that you folks may have. But again, nothing too earth shattering in Holly's budget this year, but we'll take any questions that you might have.
so like with all the other budgets, these are the actual, what the, each head has asked for. They haven't been massaged already down to get into our budget limits.
No, this is the mayor's budget. We didn't really tweak anything, and historically we haven't. Anything that we've changed is based on conversations with the department heads, either from a kind of more detailed analytic look, but we didn't change anything until agreed to. The only change between what you would think of as like a departmental request versus what the finance department / mayor is kicking out in front of you tonight would be the staffing requests. And that information is all in the packet. And you can see, to kind of just make it plain and simple, you can basically take the budget that I'm showing you tonight for each departmental. And if somebody had a staffing request, you can basically add that difference onto that between their staffing requests. So this request number 5 here, I'll highlight it. This was Holly's request. So basically the difference between her staffing request and current levels, the change was about $16,000. So that would be the variance between the departmental requested and what we're actually presenting tonight. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Does anybody have any questions for Holly, or either on her budget or her staffing request? The staffing request was to move the deputy clerk from 30 hours to 40 hours to full time. No? Okay. And then Holly's last budget election. Sure, Holly's just hoping all elections get canceled next year after this year. But again, pretty straightforward. The 2020 budget was set at $43,000. We'll actually end up over that, but we do have some grant funds to offset that. Obviously, I think everybody knew we were going to be over the elections budget for 2020 just due to all the COVID precautions. But 2021 slows down again, so we've knocked that budget down pretty significantly to $20,000. Any questions on the elections budget? All right. So that's Holly's budget. Pretty easy. Here is the IT budget. Just kind of touch real briefly. We saw wages go up about 1.9%, benefits up about 1.85%. Health and dental, we did see decrease by about 14%, but again, that was a switch in the elections when the individuals had a family plan, moved on to employee plus spouse. And you can see anytime you have an election like that, it's a pretty significant amount when they make the change. Non-labor costs are up about 4.76%. The biggest jump, and John can speak to this a little bit, but the biggest jump here, I'll try to highlight this column here, was in this outside services contract too. I'll highlight it in yellow for now so you can see it. But overall, John's budget really only increased by about 0.95%. John, do you want to speak to kind of that jump in 50216, the outside services contracts, in terms of what that jump was? Is it John here?
He's on, but I
John's
think he
muted.
muted himself.
Sorry about that. Yeah, a lot of those, we've gotten a better handle on our SmartNet agreements as far as where things are being allocated, and through the previous 2 years, things have been in kind of a state of flux, and we're just trying to get some continuity and consistency between where we are charging things. So I also built in from historically what we've been seeing is about a 5% increase in those annual fees. These are all of our networking devices that go on. We've also started to absorb all of the other additional costs as far as the Adobe accounts that everybody has, as far as Adobe DC Pro, so they can go in and actually do their own manipulations of PDF accounts and stuff like that. We've got, I think, 13 out there, and that's $4,300 just for those. We've consolidated all the 2 Zix Corp accounts, and that ended up being $6,300. Archive Social, Marco, which is our telephone hardware maintenance fees in there. And that's really about all that we have in there. Then there's $9,000, so about $4,000 in there for media expenses as far as maintenance fees in there. But a lot of this is just different maintenance agreements on all of the hardware that we have.
Yeah, and you can see from the chart here too, the IT budget has kind of been a work in progress because it is a newer department, and B, John's doing a nice job of kind of trying to find costs that historically have been allocated to different departments, which creates kind of an administrative nightmare, and really just dumping them into the IT budget. So you can see where this, the 2018 actual and 2019 actual on this orange line, these orange columns, you see the jump in the 2020 and 21 budgets. So again, it's a work in progress, but it's getting better, and we are trying to find ways to kind of trim down on the administrative work that some department heads are doing. And John in particular, like last year, it was the telephones. We were allocating those to every single department for the landlines and charter and things like that. And it didn't make any sense because it all ended up in the same bottom line anyway. So instead of going through that exercise, we just said, you know what, let's pull it out of the departmental budgets and just throw it into the IT budget. So those are some of the work that he's doing as well. Does anybody have any specific questions for John on his budget? Okay. John, you're all done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, nothing too exciting here, really no shift at all. We didn't apply the pay increase to you. I want to take that up with the mayor, but again, no major shift for you guys, little jump just kind of in terms of rounding on the benefits piece of things, but nothing significant, about $5. And for the next kind of couple ones, until we get to the finance department, I'm just going to jump through pretty quickly because there's nothing too earth shattering in them. But if you have a question or need me to stop, just, feel free to jump in. Judicial, this is obviously our courts. We did see about a 2.42% increase in wages overall. That's mainly due to kind of the jump in longevity because we don't see a ton of labor in this department. But we also did increase the judges' wages just slightly as well too. So that's why you're seeing a little bit higher jump than the 2% on that side of things. Benefits are up slightly. Again, non-labor costs did not change at all. This budget overall changed about 1.87% from the previous year's budget. And you can see just kind of looking at the graph, it's been kind of slow and steady in terms of labor. If you look at the jump in the 2020 labor budget, we did increase the clerk's hours by about a total of 105 hours. That's why you see the bigger jump on the blue line here in the 2020 budget, but overall everything's been pretty slow and steady on the judicial side of things. Legal, again, this remains static, and you can see kind of based on actuals versus budget. Again, 18 and 19 are on the right hand side, 20 and 21 budgets are on the left hand side here. Really, we don't see major fluctuations in this. This may be something that could be amended prior to us finalizing the budget. I know Attorney Dragney is working. It's time to renew the contract with them, so we have to kind of see what they're going to change. Hopefully it's not too significant, but this is one department that we may see a slight jump in terms of potential legal costs by the time you see the final document, either on the 22nd, 29th, or at council. We may need to make a tweak on this depending on when we get the revised contract. Here is the mayor's budget. Pretty straightforward. Mayor's wages, they're actually set by policy. So you don't see the 2% jump with him. It's about 1.1%. Benefits followed suit up about 0.6%. And then health and dental jumped up by about 2.31%. Again, pretty much in line with what we put in for our assumptions at this point. Non-labor, we saw a jump of about 2.34%, but in terms of dollars, it's very, very minimal. And his overall budget changed by about 1.38%. But again, based on the graphs down here, you can see everything's been pretty slow and steady in terms of actual versus the last 2 years' budgets for the mayor's budget. Outside of maybe the fact he's underpaid, but. Okay, finance. This one gets a little sticky because we do have this line here, and I'll highlight it. The taxi grant built into this, and I'll touch on this kind of separately from where everything is right now. So if we kind of factor out the taxi grant side of things, wages, benefits, health and dental, we didn't see any changes in the department at all. So everything's kind of hovering around that 2.5% change with those three categories. Non-labor costs did jump up about 5%. Part of that is this line here, this miscellaneous outside services. You can see now we have a budget of about $3,100. This relates to EBC fees or Employee Benefits Corporation. This is our flex kind of administrator. We had been coding these costs here starting in 19, but we never actually budgeted for them. So you can see here in the 2019 column, we had 5,300. Year to date, we have 2,000, and this is just through August. So, but we never budgeted for it. So that's part of the jump. And then we did see a little jump in office supplies. I'm actually, as I was going through this today, I made a note to go back and look at this in terms of why it jumped. Maybe Lisa or Ryan have an idea in terms of something that we may need, but I'm actually going to go back and look at this, and we may see this number decrease a little bit. next time you see this number. So I do have a note to go back and look at that. But overall, that explains the kind of the 5% jump in non-labor costs. In total, the increase is $5,000 for non-labor costs, factoring out the taxi piece of it. So the total increase without taxi for the finance department is about 2.9%. That includes wages, benefits, health insurance, and non-labor costs. The taxi line here is 50219. You can see we jumped it up to $206,000 versus the 191 in 2020. This one is a little goofy because we basically budgeted at the max to max out the grant side of things, but then we also have to pay back the grant on the back end for money not spent. But at the end of the day, the net effect is pretty much zero. I think 21, we're actually budgeting like out of pocket about $3,000 for the city for the taxi program itself. So whatever we don't use up in taxi grant expenditures, we see the same offset in revenue. So it's like a 1-for-1 change. The budget to actuals always look weird, but you basically net in the same place. Does that make sense for everybody? Kind of a confusing little program, but at the end of the day, it doesn't have a huge impact. But also, if we see that we're kind of bumping up against the expenditure restraint side of things or something like that, need to make a small tweak to, you know, $4,000, $5,000, what have you. This is one line that we can potentially play with and change around to meet the expenditure restraint side of things. But right now, we do budgeted at max to max out that grant agreement in case fare revenues aren't there or ridership is through the roof or something like that. Again, I kind of set up two separate grants here, two separate graphs here. See overall in the orange, the non-labor, it's been pretty steady. Same thing with the actual labor costs in the blue here. 18 actual to 19 actual saw a little bit of jump, but again, that was with the restructure and pulling in an additional staff. But you can see the 20 and 21 budgets have been a pretty steady, you know, / small increase in labor costs compared to actuals in 19. So overall, nothing too earth-shattering. The wild card is always that taxi grant, but again, you kind of have a 1-for-1 relationship on the revenue side of things as well. This one's a little more detailed than the ones I just went through. Does anybody have any questions on the finance one? Okay. Assessor, again, you see a little bit of a drop. Graph's a little bit easier. See drop down in the 2021 budget from the about $44,000. That's because we renegotiated the contract and eliminated the walkthroughs for the next 5-year period. So we did get a little bit of contract reduction there. So the assessor costs went down a little bit, but overall they're pretty steady. They stick to their contract. And then we have community commitment. This holiday promotion, that's actually the fireworks that we budget every year. This one, we do have 5,000 budgeted right now. It may not be that high because we do already have a down payment of about $2,000 for this year's fireworks that we never use. So we can apply that to next year if we can have fireworks, if/when. So there is a possibility we could either A, reduce this budget in 21 to the tune of like $2,500, or you can leave it there for kind of the one-off things that come up in terms of, you know, a chamber program or something like that. We would have a little bit built in here for, you know, a small $1,000, $2,000 grant. You don't have to tell me right now if that's a decision you want to make, but just something to keep in mind. You could either drop that budget or just leave it here for 21 if something comes up, if we want to issue a small grant or help the chamber out or, you know, help whoever out. So just something to think about there.
One thing that's come up is there's a 175th anniversary for Stoughton is next year. And I think there's going to be an effort to do some sort of a promotion to celebrate that. So I'm not really sure what that's going to involve yet, but potentially some of the money could be used for that.
Okay. Again, we don't need a decision tonight. We'll kind of take it as, you know, if nobody brings it back up, we'll just leave it there. And, you know, internally, we can kind of make a decision on it next year for a small grant here or there if somebody asks. You know, certainly bring it back through finance. But you can just let me know one way or the other.
Just a very quick question, Jamin. And
Yep.
that is, does this have anything to do with the fair?
No, well,
The fair has their own fireworks, but next year, the 4th is actually on a Sunday. So there's a possibility that we might consolidate or partner. We haven't really had that discussion yet. But they typically have their own fireworks. But this year it's gonna land on the same night.
Yeah, that just seems to me to be pretty duplicative. And maybe we could at least look at that to consolidate our efforts in terms of fireworks with the Dane County, with the fair here in Stoughton.
Yeah, and the fireworks, that's really half the cost. The chamber did a fundraising for the other half last year. So really the fireworks in a typical year is $10,000 for the total cost.
Well, we're in quite a year at this point, so we're in a lean year. So anything we can do, even a number of thousands of dollars, is something that we should look at, I believe. So.
we can talk about it and bring something back to the 22nd meeting. Yeah, so we'll bring that back. Next one up is police, unless anybody has any other questions for me on kind of the departments that I'm responsible for in the general fund.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up, Jamin, is on the employee request, what we did is the personnel committee had a discussion and made a recommendation, which, was approved, to have the request come through the committee. So all the department heads were at the last personnel, or actually over 2 meetings, to do a presentation on their request. So we're not really here tonight to, relive that conversation. We do have the recommendation from the personnel, which Jamin mentioned earlier, and then the rest of the requests are still in the packet. And those would still be under consideration, but at this point, it doesn't feel like there's going to be enough resources to fill, anything more than that has been recommended. The personnel committee did not talk about dollar amounts at all at that meeting. Am I missing anything, Lisa or AJ?
I think real quick, the item that you tasked us with was to look at needs and do a true needs assessment. As Sid said, we're running in lean times. We want to make sure that we're not adding additional headcount where it's not absolutely make it or break it. And so I sent a memo out to all of you today that talked about that and the process we went through. Jamin has included all of the requests, but during the meeting, Chair Reeves had asked and did have a second and a vote of all to none, that we not go back through all of those discussions again in front of the entire committee of the whole. This has been reviewed by the personnel committee, just as anything else goes to the appropriate committee. And then the recommendation comes out of that committee to the committee of the whole. So we just don't want to go back through that process. Lisa, is there anything else that we should discuss? Lisa Reeves?
No, I don't think so. I think that summarizes it. And we did, this was over, I think it was mentioned, this was over a period of 2 evenings. And many of us had read through the packet and the presentations prior to. There were a lot of good questions asked, I think. All were considered equally. And so I felt good that, that we really had some good conversations and questions. And just like any other, you mentioned this, AJ, much of the work that's done in council, the detail is really at the committee level. And I felt like it was appropriate that, that it came to the personnel first so we could really have those discussions and conversations. So
right? We truly felt that we vetted it out and have a good recommendation.
Yeah, and this is the first year we did that, so when everything is said and done, we can kind of evaluate, you know, how we feel about that going forward. But I think for the sake of efficiency, I mean, this is already, you know, turning into a long meeting. I think from that standpoint, I think it worked out pretty well. Plus, I really feel that the Personnel Committee, you know, came up with solid recommendation, good rationale, and, you know, all the requests were good requests. And I know there were others that probably weren't even submitted. Everybody that submitted a request did a really nice job advocating for the positions or additional hours that they had. But, you know, you heard Dave earlier talk about, you know, spending caps and limitations and expense restraint and net new construction. You know, we're really in a difficult place. And I can tell you that we're already advocating for next year's legislative budget to once again try to get more local control and really look for some exemptions, you know, with the spending cap, especially in the area, you know, of public safety and support for public safety. But, you know, in recent years, those requests have fallen on deaf ears at the state level, but we're going to continue to fight for that.
The one issue we had in personnel, which was a unanimous for an increase with one position for Public Works. We had some discussion about that. Although it was unanimous, it wasn't unanimously wonderful for me especially. But I voted in favor just because I thought there was a legitimate request for that. But just from our personnel meeting last time, that was the only one that we agreed to for an increase. Just so everybody knows it, you know, we had a lot of discussion about even that position and what ultimately happens with council for the budget. That position still is a little bit up in the air, as I understand. So.
Well, it's in the budget with $28 to spare, so nice work. Okay, moving on to police. Wages actually only went up by about 0.5% in 2021. There's a lot of moving parts to this. They had basically a move from an existing officer to a sergeant wage. But that individual actually came in a little bit lower than what was budgeted for the 2020 sergeant wage. And then the replacement officer that came in to basically backfill isn't the right word, but basically fill the open position for that move to sergeant. That wage was significantly less than what the predecessor had. And then we did see basically the office administrator retire, and that wage came in lower as well. There's a couple other little moving parts there, but that's why we don't see the kind of 2% overall increase in the law enforcement, because we did see some kind of moving around in positions and then lower wages for people backfilling those positions. A little confusing. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. Benefits, again, we only saw go up about 1.35%. Police, on the one hand, were really the only individuals impacted by an increase in WRS, even though it was very small. It does have an increase on the benefits numbers because it's a smaller number to begin with. So when you increase the dollars, the percent gets a little bit bigger. And then health and dental, we actually saw go down by about 4% overall. And again, that comes down to a number of different election changes. I'm pulling up a sheet on another spreadsheet I have up here. Yeah, so there's I think one or two, actually 2 or 3 individuals that moved from a family plan election down to a lower election, and that can have a pretty significant jump. And then we saw a couple other jumps as well too. So once we laid out where everybody is right now and put the new rates in, we actually saw a little bit of a decrease in the health and dental insurance on the law enforcement side of things. So overall, we actually saw wages and benefits basically stay pretty well static at the end of the day. Non-labor costs went up by 8%, but there's actually a really good reason for it. I'll kind of highlight this number here. Show my good lines though. This operating expense line here that I just kind of shaded across. The far right column is the 18 budget of $49,000, 50,000 if you round up. The 18 activity was actually 68,000. The 19 budget was 50,000, and the 19 activity was actually 65,000. Now we left the budgets the same for 20 and 21, but you can see in 18 and 19 we were consistently about 15,000 give or take over. And when we had discussions internally, we found out that when there's expenditures incurred that are related to like offsetting grant funds, this is where those costs had been recorded but never budgeted for. So what we did this year is we actually budgeted offsetting revenue somewhere, but then we created this line down here called grant expenditures, and you can see there's 15,000 in there now to basically account for it, but also segregate it so it doesn't kind of throw off the budget in other areas. So that's really the biggest jump that you see on the non-labor costs for the law enforcement. But overall, the budget only went up by about 0.61%. And then again, you can see the graphs down here, pretty straightforward. Even though we're talking bigger dollar amounts, everything has been pretty slow and steady. On the non-labor costs, the orange columns here, really we haven't seen any changes over the last few years. Labor obviously keeps ticking up, but we do see wage increases coming in and health insurance increases and things like that. Chief is here if you have any specific questions, but overall, even though it's a pretty big budget and a lot of lines, there really wasn't any major shifts or changes in this one. But does anybody have any specific questions?
Well, I just have a comment if I could, Jamin, and that is when you look at things like dental and health insurance, you have to look backwards because what AJ did a number of years ago to get us in a better shape with these costs. I think overall for the whole city, we made some really good decisions in the past, which really has taken us to a better spot right now. So I think I think some past decisions have really improved our ability to keep our costs in line. I want to mention that because I think that we really got a lot of bang for our buck when AJ started really working on, especially health and dental.
Jamin, if I could ask a quick question of the chief. This is Greg.
Go ahead, Greg. You got to speak up a little bit. You're a little quiet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, usually. Yeah, Chief, I just wanted to ask, you've got two requests for staffing. One would be for the public safety officer, and another one is for an additional officer. Could you tell us what that would add to the budget?
Well, the police officer position would add about $85,000 to the budget, and I believe the difference in the community service officer was about 30,000, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere's in that ballpark.
Yeah, once we factor in benefits on the CSE position, it's about 41,000.
41,000. Okay. Thank you.
Jamin, I've got one kind of general accounting question, but it shows up more so in Chief's budget here. With some of the account items there on the left, just generally in the account numbers, there's some of them in there that are listed that haven't had activity in years. How long do you keep account numbers active for? Or with one, or what level of inactivity do you need to have to deactivate account numbers, and do you ever deactivate account numbers?
Directed patrol, traffic complaint at Lincoln Road. Are you muted, Jamin?
Yeah, I am, sorry. Yeah, yeah, we actually started this process this year. We're starting at the project level though. If I could show you how many accounts we actually have, your jaw would probably drop. So if you look at this account structure, if you look at this account structure here with the BFO codes that were implemented years ago, you can probably add on average 10 lines to each line here. And this is just one department. So it's mind numbing when you actually get into the software itself. So we started at the project level to start cleaning those up first. And then I think we did a 5-year look. So we want to keep 5 years of history. So we started with 15 and worked back, and anything that didn't have any activity, we were basically eliminating from the system. Not deleting, but inactivating. So we'll kind of keep with this 5-year look, and hopefully we should start seeing things work themselves out then.
Okay, no, I mean, I delve into, so we've got SAP running our account structure and that too. So there are many times that I get to delve into that. So I well understand how many account numbers are attached to, you know, the most mundane of things.
Yeah, we found that a lot of them really weren't beneficial. It just created more administrative work, which, you know, we're trying to streamline some things. But as Jamin mentioned, they're still there if we want to reactivate them.
Yeah, I'm trying to do that in our inventory system at the moment.
Yeah, good luck with that. I know how that
Oh
goes.
my God, it's like you say, you just sit and stare at all these account numbers. It's crazy. Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions for the chief or myself? Okay, thanks, chief. All right, senior center. Wages, we saw basically a 2% increase. Benefits followed suit right around 2%, 0.19 give or take. Health and dental, we did see a jump of about 11%, but again, that's just due to a shift. Somebody moving to, I think, family. I can't remember, but let me look.
Yes.
Yes, actually, no. Yeah, you had an employee that didn't have benefits and is now taking benefits. So, and we saw some other election shifts in the middle as well. But that you can see when you just have a couple different shifts, it really does make a huge impact. But that's why we see an increase in the health and dental side of things. Non-labor went up 7%, even though it seems like a big percentage. It's really only about $6,000. And I went through this. I couldn't find anything that really kind of stuck out in terms of what got increased that maybe shouldn't have been. Everything looked pretty reasonable to me. And overall, we saw an increase of about 4.36% in the senior center budget. But again, most of that really relates to the health and dental jump at the end of the day. Kind of work our way down here, walk through the graphs very quickly. 18 and 19. In the 2020 budget, you can see a little bit of a jump here in the wages and labor, but again, it was just kind of a accounting treatment of how we treated the foundation grant, and how the costs were recorded, and the fact that grant was actually decreased a little bit as well too. But overall, the changes from the 2020 budget to the 21 budget, really nothing really sticks out with the exception of the health and dental insurance. But Cindy is here if anybody has any questions for her.
I just have another one, and that is we had a Commission on Aging meeting a little bit ago, and senior center is running out of space to be able to do its job. And we had some discussion about that and whether or not, they could expand to an annex And I don't know if that should be considered as a possibility for this next year or not, but it's something I raised some questions with Cindy about last time, and because they really are running out of space. So whether we should anticipate the necessity of doing something in terms of space for next year, I'd like us to at least look at that and consider it. So I don't know if Cindy can address that or not, or if we're way premature on that.
Well, Jamin and the mayor and I have had several conversations about this. It really doesn't fit in the operating budget. But I would like to propose that in 2021, that the city would agree to not rent out, by the end of 2021, that the senior center would take over the annex. We've had conversations that I would fundraise for the reconstruction inside, and then take over that space as programming space and classroom opportunities for us. No staff offices would be moved over there, but it would strictly be all programming and classroom. I think
And
Go
Cindy,
ahead,
that is
Sid.
Cindy, that is city property, and we'd be getting,
Correct.
we're getting some rent on that at this point.
Correct.
Not a whole lot, I don't think, but it's a way that I think we should at least keep that in mind in terms of shift, because I think we'd have a reduction in the amount that we're bringing in, but it would be a great use of space, because it is our property.
Well, and part of it, and I'm not asking for that decision to be made tonight, because it can be, like I said, it doesn't look right at our operational budget. But I would like to have the discussion of, if, as Sid said, the senior centers really scrunch for space. We're landlocked. I can't add on. We certainly don't want to even consider trying to build a new senior center, obviously. So the annex is really the best opportunity that we would have to be able to expand our programming. It's right there. We don't have to build it. As I said, I'll fundraise for the construction changes inside. It really is the rent that you give up by the 4 renters. And Jamin, offhand, do you remember what that is? Is it like, am I remembering 28, maybe? 28,000?
Yeah, it's around 30,000.
Yeah, for the year.
Not to put a wrinkle in this, but if you're gonna move that route, we actually need a decision by the end of this month. Because the next renewal term for one of the tenants would be 1/1 of 21, and we have to give them 60-day notice. Not that we'd have to kick them out on 1/1/21, but we'd have to at least let them know that, hey, by whatever month, we need you out of there. So
Well, even if it's 60 days, so, I mean, it could be, you could make the decision in December. However you want to make the decision.
We have it,
Well, but I mean, we wouldn't be taking over the space until I had finished the fundraising. So I mean, there's some leeway in here, because I wouldn't make you kick them out.
We have to let them know by 60 days that the lease term renews, which is January 1st.
Oh,
So
I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Unless you say we're not going to do anything with this building until 2022, then we can wait till like November 1st next year to tell everybody, which you probably wouldn't want to do, but that
No,
would be the first.
well,
Well,
I mean,
think it's a priority issue, and so I think we should put it on as an agenda item for city council.
it's already on finance,
Okay,
so maybe we should get Cindy at that finance committee meeting, Jamin.
Yeah, we'll have to put it. not, yeah.
I didn't say that.
I'll change the agenda. I think we have to have this discussion at the very next finance meeting. And then council decision at the last meeting in October, if we're gonna do this.
Yeah, because it is a time sensitive issue because we have a lease that we have to look at, so. Okay, I didn't want to put a wrinkle on it, but I needed to actually say it, so.
No, I appreciate
Okay.
it.
Thanks Sid, for bringing that up.
Yeah, and by a weird kind of way, that does have an impact on general fund revenue. Not entirely sure of the amount. Let me look. Could or could not. I'll show you guys how this works since we're talking about it. So senior center annex revenue is this 29,000. Basically, we have set the funding level for this at 140. So any excess revenues, which is kind of this 55, we approach it a little more conservatively. I think I put it at 45 for now, but this excess actually does go into the general fund at the end of the year. So if you pull that out, that number goes from like 45, 55 to 25,000. So there is an impact on the general fund, just so everybody's aware.
Well, the $28 could go there.
Well, that's already there. That's not going anywhere.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But we can talk about that at finance, but I just wanted to at least get that out there. Okay, any other questions for Cindy on the senior center? Okay, thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
All right, the last one for the evening is Opera House. Just go here, it's a little easier to see. At the end of the day, there wasn't any major shifts with the Opera House in terms of increases. And I'm just going to touch very briefly on kind of the numbers in terms of where we are. But given the history with the Opera House, the pandemic and the overall impact that it could potentially have, and kind of the historical trends of where the senior center was, or not senior center, Opera House was heading, we thought we should at least kind of give a brief overview of what the historical numbers have looked like. And then, Bill's on the line too, and he has some other numbers and anecdotal evidence that he wants to go through as well too, to kind of at least start the conversation, maybe not make a decision tonight, but at least start the conversation and just get everybody up to speed on where the Opera House is currently. So if we look at, the one item that the general fund kicks over here, to the Opera House, this 182, this line here, you can see that's unchanged from the 2020 budget. Wages went up 2% on the dot, benefits up slightly, 1.5%. Health and dental, we were able to knock down about 12%, but again, it's just kind of a guess at this point. There's an open position there right now, depending on when schedules pick up and shows start again. That position is going to remain open until then. So we just kind of wanted to meet in the middle in terms of health elections. So we didn't go way up top and go family, and we didn't go the lowest route. We just kind of picked the middle. So that's why you see a decrease in the health insurance for the Opera House. At the end of the day, they're non-event type, non-labor costs. We were able to knock those down about 16%. You can see the biggest changes on the ad side of things. It went from 110 down to 80. And at the end of the day, we're basically leaving them with a bottom line of 170 in the budget at this point in time. So again, we cut some costs from the budget. We left the transfer static, but I'm going to kind of go through the history of it, and we can kind of talk about maybe why that transfer hasn't been keeping up with the current operating model of the Opera House. And really kind of start the discussion for the plan moving forward with the Opera House in terms of what the city wants it to be, and how do we get it there. So again, no major changes. We left everything pretty static with the exception of dropping some costs for the Opera House. But I'll go through the history real quick, and then we can talk about, see if I have this up. I gotta find it. And then we'll let Bill kind of touch on some things that he wants to talk about as well too. Oops. Apologize. I thought I had all this up already. I did.
Yeah, I gotta put us through that one again, are you?
Nope. Hey, you guys learned a lot from that. If nothing else, that the TIFs are creating problems.
I hope I retained some of it.
Just keep saying TIF in your sleep, because I do. Okay, so Opera House, just real quick kind of historical analysis, and then I'll turn it over to Bill, and we'll see if we can have a conversation tonight. I know it's getting late. But overall, the financial struggles have persisted for a number of years. You know, by 2011, we already saw fund balance that was a negative $108,000. And it appears that the existing city transfer methodology isn't sufficient to support the existing operating model. Now, I'm not in the theater business. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that not looking at this and not making a change one way or another isn't going to be the answer. So that's why we're kind of going through this to show you that, you know, we do need some action in some way, shape, or form. But at the end of the day, really, conversations regarding the Opera House's financial state should have started back in 2011, 2012, 2013. But here we are, we're talking about it now. And I think the pandemic really kind of jump-started these conversations. I'll go through this in graphical format, but I did just kind of want to lay this out. And you can certainly refer back to this later too. But we'll just work left to right here. And these are actual numbers here, net income / loss. And you can see historicals and then what we're forecasting for 2020. So the actual net incomes, you can see where we've ranged anywhere from a $57,000 loss to a $10,000 loss. This year, we're anticipating right around an $80,000 loss. Now, if you move to the next column, this was the budgeted income. The third column over is that variance, the actual to budget. And you can see those numbers get pretty significant to the tune of $100,000 at times that we were running in the difference between what we were budgeting versus what the actual numbers were. So again, this gets back to the point where we probably can't keep ignoring this, and we really need to start having these conversations now. Now, do I think we're going to have a final decision tonight and an actual plan? No, but we needed to at least get this in front of everybody to start talking about. The middle column here, fund balance, you can see that's consistently been increasing, and at the end of 2020, we're basically forecasting about a negative fund balance of approximately $360,000. Moody's did ask about the Opera House this year. They noted this, even though it's not part of the general fund. They do look at this and they identified it and said, hey, what's going on with the Opera House? What's your plan? You know, we talked about it, but again, nobody saw the pandemic coming either. The unreserved fund balance, which is kind of the savings account, if you will, what you actually have to spend, that's actually forecasted to be about a negative $435,000 by the end of the year. And you can see that number's just been continually growing since 2013. And then the transfer from the city is over here. And you can see we haven't seen real significant jumps since 2016 at the end of the day. So we've seen continued impact on the unreserved fund balance and really minimal growth in the city's transfer over to the Stoughton Opera House. This graph just kind of lays out a little bit more visually in terms of what the budget to actual was. You can see the orange here was the budgeted net income and the blue is the actual. Obviously, we're forecasting in 2020 this longer blue line towards the right. You can see the difference between what we've been budgeting and what's actually been happening. And now if you look at the very far right where it looks like it's all black, it's actually, there's a little orange speck there. That's the bottom line that we're giving the Opera House for 2021. And you can see based on what we've been doing budget to actual in the past, that little orange speck probably isn't going to cut it and get us to where we need to be, especially considering the pandemic and what's happening right now. Budget to actual versus the city transfer. Again, this is just kind of to show you where the variance in the budget to actual was each year and kind of where the city transfer has been. And you can see since 2017, it's been pretty static for the most part. Some jumps here and there, changed significantly. Fund balance, again, just to kind of give you an idea of where we've been heading, and it's been a pretty steady trajectory at this point where the fund balance has been going, and these are negative amounts. The top line is 0, negative isn't good for fund balance. And then here's the unreserved fund balance, the actual kind of spendable fund balance, if you will, even though it's negative, you can see again, pretty steady decreases all the way through. And again, at 2020, we're anticipating about $450,000 in negative unreserved fund balance. So again, just to reiterate, we're forecasting about an $80,000 loss, $361,000 negative fund balance, and a negative $439,000 unreserved fund balance. Again, it's just a guess at this point. We're still forecasting out. And then just to kind of put things in perspective in terms of what we're giving the Opera House versus what would happen if we just said, you know what, we're going to close the doors right now. This is the cash outflow that would happen. As of 9/30/2020, the Opera House does owe the city about $196,000. What does that mean? That means the Opera House's checking account, their cash balance is actually negative $196,000. I haven't been here that long, but this has never happened. And we've never really been too close to this happening. So you can see where we're at right now to the tune of what the negative cash balance may be by the end of the year. Amounts due from artists right now, and again, this is just a snapshot in time. This will change by year end, but this is just to put things in perspective. We basically have to pay, we get paid back, assuming all of the prepaid costs that we've paid to artists that we'd get back is $78,000. We owe money to vendors of about $5,000. Amounts due to the patrons, prepaid ticket sales, if you will, and gift cards, things like that is $238,000. So basically the total cash outflow for the city right now would be $361,000 if we were to just cease operations and say no more. So that's just to kind of put things in perspective. So pandemic aside, here's what we know. The existing city transfer methodology is not sufficient to support the existing operating model. And the negative fund balance will continue to increase. And I think these graphs up here show you that. It's been a steady decrease. Nothing has really changed. And I think we can expect the same thing to continue to occur. If the city does not increase the transfer amount to the Opera House, we must do the following, or a mixture of find a way to reduce costs by a considerable amount, increase revenues by a considerable amount, attract more profitable shows, or reduce the number of shows that do not turn a profit, potentially not need as many staff, things like that. And then I think the Opera House itself wouldn't be the Opera House that we know today. Again, operations this should be eventually cease. If the city is not willing to invest additional funds into the Opera House and or the operating model cannot be altered enough to turn an annual profit. Financially speaking, does anybody have any questions on what I just laid out here?
No, it's just that it's very upsetting because I don't remember us seeing these in this kind of detail previously in the previous years. So I appreciate us finally understanding this. And also, I guess, as you go through it, I know a couple years ago, council had asked the Opera House to come up with a business plan going forward. And I'm sure you have done it, but because I'm not on the Opera House board, it would be nice if that is shared also with the rest of the committee or the or council.
So Damon, I have a question, and that is, so in order to close the doors, what would the city be responsible for now?
Well, right now, and I guess let me just back up. This presentation isn't me saying we need to shut the Opera House down, because I'm far from that opinion. That's not an opinion, and that's not me as the finance director. That's me as a Stoughton resident. I'm just asking the question.
if we determined that that was the way that we needed to go without, putting all this into a sacred cow like this, how much would it be to get out of it?
Well, you would end up being out about the $200,000 in negative cash right now. The financials already kind of reflect that. And then you would basically pay out of pocket to ticket holders, things like that, approximately $165,000, give or take. In
So
total. Actually, no, that's not right. No, it would actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, net, if the artists were to pay back everything we've already given them, which is probably unlikely, maybe you get half of that, but assuming we get all of that money back, best case scenario would be 165,000. And then the 196 that the city has already kind of fronted to the Opera House.
And where would that money come from if they close doors?
General fund. No, I mean, you saw in Dave's presentation, I mean, we do have strong reserves, but that's not what we want to use our reserves for. Again, I don't think either Bill or I or the mayor are anticipating an answer tonight, but historically, in my short time here, what I've seen is we get in front with the Opera House budget. There's a little back and forth and we move on. I thought it was only fair to get this in front of you to show you, listen, this is what it looks like right now. And it's not good, because even in a good year, assuming shows start up in February, we're giving the Opera House a bottom line of $170 to play with. And you can see where they've been historically. And this isn't meant to bash on management or anything like that. I'm not in the business. I don't understand it and I don't have the answers, but to show you that, we're giving them $170 to play with. When we look at historically where we've fallen budget to actual, it doesn't work. And we're already in a hole, and to continue to let that hole grow isn't the answer. I don't have the answer, but not making a decision is sometimes worse than making the wrong decision at this point. So again, we just needed to get this in front of you to show you that, we're just heading in the wrong direction. And it's pretty obvious when you look at it just from a visual standpoint. This speaks volumes to me, this particular slide. I don't envy your job right now, because now you are tasked with putting a value on the Opera House. And that is an asset that you need to determine if you want to invest in or not, based on the benefits it has to the community as a whole, the downtown economy, the local residents, the regional draw, all of that needs to be considered and discussed and talked about. Now, can Bill take this model and adjust it and make a model that breaks even? Probably. It'd probably be a one-man show, but then I'm afraid you're kind of stuck with local draws, maybe from Madison, maybe from Janesville, and then you lose that economic impact of the Opera House. So the numbers are what they are, and we wanted to show them to you, but there's kind of this other piece of the Opera House that, I'll let Bill talk about now because I've been talking enough, that really needs to be considered as well. And then we need to somehow come back together and find an answer. And I'm not saying we're going to have an answer by the time we wrap this budget up, but this is going to be an ongoing conversation for a while, I think. But again, in terms of financials, does anybody have any other questions for me? Otherwise, I'll kind of give it to Bill to walk through a few of the things that he had.
No, like I said, I definitely appreciate this. And I guess it is unfortunate, and the Opera House is the gem of our city. So I don't want to see it going away. I'm just curious with, if the sales with the gift shop and, the other things that have been proposed with the Opera House in a good year, was that expected to make up this difference?
And I think this would be a good time to turn it over to Bill and outside of me making one last comment, that this isn't going to be an overnight answer. We kind of need to do, like my wife would say, we're kind of in triage right now, and let's stabilize and make a plan. It's kind of where we're at right now. But Bill, are you kind of ready to go through your information?
Well, actually, can you hear me? Because I got this thing on that I can't hear myself.
Yep.
Just to answer Regina's question, I think that the plan on the fund balance up to this point has been exactly what you said, which is that the idea was to increase other revenues in various ways, one of which is the concessions area on the first floor, which the Friends Association has put about $50,000 into remodeling. Trying to figure out a way to stop increasing that negative balance without having to request additional funds from the general fund. And with, I'm trying to figure out how much detail I should get into. Some of the things that we did in previous years to try to slow that kind of drop would be things like sales tax. Way back in the day, sales tax was folded into the cost of a ticket. We broke sales tax out and then tacked it on top of our ticket sales. Online ticketing fees is another thing that we did. Tacking on a credit card fee is another thing we did. Changing our obstructed tickets from 50% off to 25% off. There's all these kind of little tweaks that we've made over the course of the last 10 years to try to keep the amount smaller, as small as possible, but we haven't been able to keep pace with the decreases. And so 2020 has put us in a precarious situation in that while up until March, I believe that it was still possible to slow or stop the leak on the fund balance, and then be able to reduce the amount that was in the fund balance, but maintain the current level of funding from the city with the concessions area downstairs. 2020 being like an $85,000 hit. That's just no longer something that's 2 or 3 years in the future. You know, that's something that's right now. Or as I said in my memo that I sent to you, that's something that really needs to be decided, say September or October. If we don't have any shows happening for the entire year of 2021, with no expectation of shows in the spring of 2022, that's a really serious situation. I mean, the fund balance situation is a serious one, and but at the same time, it's not one it's not one that we weren't aware of. So I don't want anybody to be freaking out too badly. And the difference in support that we're talking about from the general fund in order to stop that decrease, and I got some slides I'm going to go through, but the difference that we're talking about is really a $25,000 to $40,000 difference in support. Why? Well, and there's these scenarios that Jamin has up on the screen. I have 3 different scenarios that I put together for 2021 that are all based on the same for a transfer from the general fund. One of those scenarios is that we're able to do spring shows and fall shows. Another one of those scenarios is that we can only do fall shows. And third scenario is that we have no shows at all in 2020. And the idea behind those scenarios is that, you know, typically you don't have a lot of real-time flexibility in a municipal budget. But unfortunately, or fortunately, what the pandemic presents us with is a situation where we have to be extremely flexible and we have to be able to move quickly. So there's multiple scenarios that don't require a difference in funding from the city, but require us to take different kind of incremental actions in terms of what we spend money on or don't spend money on in 2021. I will say that the Opera House is not the only venue that is experiencing this kind of traumatic situation. I've been involved with a couple different organizations. The one that comes to mind most recently is the National Independent Venue Association. Governor Evers has just announced that he's going to take 15 million of that additional CARES Act money and be investing that into venues, because basically all the venues are out of money. And when I say out of money, I mean they're not doing any shows, they're not selling any concessions, so they can't pay their staff, they can't pay their rent. What the transfer in from the general fund really represents for the Opera House is exactly that. That's paying our rent and paying our staff. And I'm going to go through the numbers, but we can't anticipate any money coming in from Evers from the CARES Fund. We're a publicly funded venue. And so same thing with the federal, with the money that's currently at play in the legislature for venues. None of that money is money that the Opera House is going to be eligible for. All of those are situations that have left us falling through the cracks to your floor right here in front of you. They're leaving it to the communities that do have publicly funded venues to make those kinds of decisions about whether or not you want to invest in those venues. The governor is investing in those venues, and we expect that the federal legislatures are going to also invest in performance venues. I'm going to show you some information that'll enlighten you a little bit about the history of the Opera House situation, but will also give you some idea about where we've been. If I can figure out how to use my machine. Jamin, can you put my thing up?
It's on its way.
Okay. Let's see. All right, you guys, can you see my screen?
Yep.
There's a joke built into that title right there, hindsight 2020, but I wouldn't change a thing. So here's some of the good news, because I think it's important to include the good news. These are some of the performance trends at the Opera House over the last, well, over a bit. Since I started as the director in 2007, this is 2008, and this is stuff that I think you guys already know, but I think it's important to look at it because it is a pretty dramatic impact on Stoughton. So that's just the number of events that have that we do now as opposed to what we were doing back in 2008. There's another performance trend. You can see community events. Community events are something that are non-ticketed events, so those don't get counted in the reserve tickets that we count towards our economic impact numbers. But you can see that back in 2008, we had, I think it was 2 community-based organizations that were able to put on events. Since then, we've been able to consistently add community organizations to the list of people who are able to use the facility. And that's by basically reducing the cost of those people, those organizations locally, so that they're able to use it as a fundraising device on their own, and keeping the Opera House a community-based organization. This is, I think, really speaks volumes to what we've been able to do as far as branding the Opera House, as far as developing a patron base. This is the kind of graph that is not achieved by anything through extreme hard work and commitment to the Opera House and to our patrons. We have developed an extremely loyal patron base. This is a completely non-messed with graph of our membership revenues from 2008 until 2019. I think in 2019, the number at the end was $126,000 in memberships in 1 year. In 2008, I think it was about 8 or 9, 8,500, something like that. So you can see we've experienced just a tremendous amount of support from our patrons and from the community. I don't have a final number on the 2020 membership drive, but knowing full well exactly what we're facing, Our patrons have been calling us up on the phone, emailing us, letting us know how much they appreciate the Opera House as a venue, as a thing in their community for those people who are living here in Stoughton. And so far, we've pulled in $75,000, just short of $75,000 in memberships for the 2020-2021 season. And that's with complete transparency and understanding of the fact that we may not have any shows. But those people are choosing to invest in the Opera House anyway. So we have about 75,000 right now, hoping to get even a few more before the end of the year. But you can see that we have a foundation of support that I think speaks volumes to what we've managed to accomplish. This is an important graph. This is a graph of the reserved tickets that have been sold over the years. And you can see that it ramps up pretty quickly and then levels off the last few years, somewhere in the 20,000, 22,000 ticket kind of area, with a couple of thousand more tickets coming in from things that we can't track because well, we could track, but we don't have the actual tickets that were sold. So we can't just go back into the machine and figure it out. Those are general admission or donate at the door kind of events, but around 22,000 different things that we have each year now. Now, as far as figuring out economic impact, there's several different things you want to look at, but the one that everyone wants to look at, the metric that everybody wants to have a magical answer to, is direct spending by patrons. These numbers are not pulled out of, I can't think of anything other than where I would have pulled them, where I didn't pull them from, where. I pulled them from a study by the Americans for the Arts, which is a federally recognized, federally acknowledged group of people who study the arts. And this is, Dane County was one of their study areas. It's a 5-year study. The last one was finished in 2015. The 2021 is delayed. But you can see that these are the averages for the amount of direct spending by a concert attendee beyond the cost of buying the ticket itself. You can see the national averages right there. This is for people who live in the community or people who are from outside of the community. Dane County averages are a little smaller than the national averages. So for the sake of Stoughton's numbers, I looked at every ticket that was purchased at the Opera House since 2008 in order to generate these numbers. And 53589 residents, anyone in 53589 was considered a resident. And so they got that number tacked on to their economic impact. And everyone else got the $33 number. This is what the economic impact of the Opera House, just in direct spending from people on the day of a show in any given year, graphs out to. And you can see it's close to $750,000 in cash spending in Stoughton at the businesses, largely on Main Street, each year from Opera House shows. This is a graph on the right side of these columns. You can see the green. That's the transfer in from the city's general fund over the course of the last 5 years. And I put that next to the economic impact that we have just in direct spending, because I think it's a really valuable way of kind of starting to wrap your head around what it is that the community is getting for their investment. I mean, in my mind, this is a very blasé kind of almost overly rational metric to look at, but it's a real thing in that, there's a lot of different ways you can invest dollars into economic development, but I can't think of any way that you're going to see as much of a significant return on your investment and pass through to the community as you're getting just from this one metric of economic impact at the Opera House. But it's important to look at the other stuff. Notably, increasing visitors to Stoughton, promoting tourism to Stoughton, attracting new businesses to Stoughton. Whether a community invests in the arts is one of the top metrics that businesses look at when they're looking to relocate to a community. General quality of life issues related to our library, our senior center, our rec department, the hospital, all of that is stuff that is taken into account by businesses because they want to be able to attract young families to those communities. So the ways in which the Opera House impacts economically Stoughton go well beyond the direct spending. But even on the direct spending, you're seeing a huge return on your investment. This is what the Opera House total revenues brought in during each year look like. You can see in 2019, we brought in just over $1 million. We brought in about $1,039,000, I think is what it was, $1,039,000 in revenue. Now that's including the money that the city has contributed. A little green chunk at the bottom there is the transfer in from the city. And you can see that over the course of the last 5 years, largely because of those adjustments that I talked about, where we made changes to our fee structures and tacked on new fees, changed our ticket structures and all that kind of stuff, we've been able to increase our revenues somewhat, but the level of funding from the city has remained more or less static over the last 5 years, which has made it somewhat difficult for us to close that hole. But really, up until now, the idea has been that at some point we would be able to close that hole and then start feeding money back into the fund balance through the development of the first floor space. Another thing that I mentioned in the memo that I sent out to you is that most performing arts venues, publicly funded or not, are going to start out with a nonprofit endowment in place. And that's something that the Opera House didn't have. The Friends of the Opera House disbanded after the restoration was complete. And then it wasn't until 2014 that the Stoughton Opera House Friends Association was formed. And while SOFA is completely devoted to endowment development, really up till this point, most of the money that's come from SOFA has been in the form of capital improvements. And that's to the tune of over $300,000 in capital improvements over the last 5 years, including about $50,000 that's been going into the first floor during the course of this pandemic, in order for us to be able to sell concessions. One of the big things about the concert venue economic model is that while we've succeeded at monetizing the Opera House in terms of community impact, where we haven't succeeded in monetizing the Opera House is in selling the people who walk in the door stuff other than tickets. The entire concert industry model is based on the idea that when they walk in the door, we have something to sell them other than the ticket. Like almost all of the money that is brought in is paid out to the artists, the management companies, and all those folks. So we don't get to hold on to 85% of that money. So there's incredibly narrow profit margins. We're meant to be padding that with things like notably concession sales. Almost every other venue makes the lion's share of their money that they're making is off of beer sales, water, all that kind of stuff. That's what we're planning on doing on the first floor. And in any other year, I would say that we were well on our way to solving the problem. But given that it's 2020, we took a real hit this year. And so while I was hoping not to do it, I have to say that in all three of my budget scenarios are reliant upon $195,000 transfer in from the city, which is $13,000 more than last year. And I really think that in order to plug that negative fund balance hole, that you're looking at $225,000 to $240,000 as a transfer in 2022. Now, as dire as, and Jamin and I have talked about it ahead of time and in previous years have brushed on it, but right now we really needed to be transparent with you as much as possible about exactly where that fund balance is, because I would not have spent the last decade, 12, 13, 14 years of my life developing the Opera House as an attraction to this community if I didn't think that it was an incredible asset to this community. Now, really what we're talking about is we're talking about a $25,000 to $40,000 funding increase. And what I think we're looking at is an incredible boom in the arts economy when we get to the other side of this thing. I think we're looking at businesses up and down Main Street going to be closing. And I think that we're going to need to be looking at trying to bolster one of the largest assets that Stoughton has as a community, but particularly on Main Street. And I really think that that's the Opera House. I know that some of you might think that that's not the case, but I would hope that most of you would think that that is in fact true. I think of that as a truth, and I don't say it as a matter of opinion. The graph that you're looking at in front of you shows the personnel and basically the personnel class for the Opera House over the last 5 years. I think one of the trends that you will have noticed in looking at all of the other departmental budgets would be that almost all of the money that's spent in those departments is spent on wages and benefits. So those pink lines are the Opera House wages and benefits, and those green lines are the transfer amounts. Again, you can see that the wages and the benefits kind of keep creeping up every year, as they do as health insurance costs go up and so on. But our transfer in is kind of stagnated. And that's because we've really been doing it a little bit willy-nilly. And you can stop me if you'd like to, but I'm taking you back to 2001 and 2005, and I'm going to zip through these as fast as I can. My point, I'll tell you ahead of time so that you can read into this, is I want to illustrate to you the way that piecemeal over the last 20 years, the Opera House funding structure has been kind of created. And to do that, you have to go all the way back to the beginning at the grand reopening when the city transferred $20,000 a year to the Opera House, and that funded a couple part-time positions. At the end of 2005, we have a problem. The Opera House, and everybody panicked, the Opera House lost $50,000. The Opera House manager at the time got a lot of slack, or she got in trouble. People were giving her really a hard time for it, and she left. She went back to school. She's working actually now up in Oshkosh at the Grand Theater up there. So she's doing fine. But there was a little bit of a crisis in 2005, so the city was looking at what to do. In 2006, they gave the media services director a $10,000 a year raise in order to, hey, can you also manage the Opera House, but continued to transfer in $20,000. And then we have a part-time admin assistant in 2006. In December of 2006, the media service director quit. They may have bit off more than they could chew. So in 2007, that's when I became the media service director and the Opera House director. City covered that entire position and still transferred 20,000 over. We have a 30-hour-a-week position. And this is where that graph picks up, the graph that I showed you where we started to talk about impact. And I'm just going to click through these, but you can see that there's various iterations on what's going on. You can see there it's a $28,000 transfer. This is in 10, we have a zero transfer. And the Opera House is more or less funding itself, but it's not funding 75% of me or any of my benefits. We get to 2011, and well, it looked like we were doing pretty good, but we took a loss. So the city finance director at the time drained the rest of the restoration fund and put it into the Opera House fund as a way of balancing that out. In 2012, we get a $58,000 transfer, which is to balance out difference in the budget versus the actuals. The city's paying for 75% of my salary and my benefits. And in theory, I'm working only 25% of my time at the Opera House. The Opera House is paying for additional positions as listed there. And this kind of goes on. You can see now we've got a zero transfer, but we're paying for wages of one position, but not the, various different iterations on this. And it goes on and on. And then finally, we start to just do direct transfers. And in 16, and then finally, we have the event coordinator leaves, and that transitions into multiple full-time positions. And then finally, in 2017, we have John Montgomery's arrival, which is when the city hired a director of IT and media services, and the Opera House director position was no longer based in the media services budget. So really, 2017 is the first year where the transfer in from the city becomes less opaque in terms of its impact on the Opera House budget. This is what the most recent years after that look like. 171,000 was the transfer, 165, 182. So, that's how we ended up in a situation where where the funding has been somewhat uneven or unsteady, is that the city was kind of struggling to compensate for what was going on while it was happening, and doing so in a way that wasn't particularly informed to what the actual needs were. And I think that's how you end up with this kind of diagram, or with this kind of diagram. But it's important to keep in mind this kind of diagram too. So, that's some of the stuff I have to share with you about, the ways in which I see the Opera House positively impacting Stoughton. I think that it's a much bigger positive impact than the $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 impacts that we're talking about. But over the course of the last 10 years, there's been a lot of heavy lifting at the Opera House to make it work with less. And over again, I've done that. And I don't know any way to change your mind if you don't think that the Opera House is having a positive impact on the community. I guess and I have just a ton of information that I could share with you if you have any questions at all, or if you just have a comment or you'd like to say anything.
Well, first of all, Bill, I do have a couple things to say. One, congratulations, you did do a fantastic job in putting Stoughton on the map. The shows that you have found and brought in are just phenomenal. And I do think it's one of the best assets that we do have in this city, along with our senior center and our other cool things that the city has to offer. But like you said, to bring in, I'm working with the redevelopment on the riverfront, and that's one of the key things why the developer really is key, not only the proposed Whitewater Park, but the Opera House and the downtown. So, and the downtown, like you said, wouldn't be as well off if it wasn't for the Opera House, especially the restaurants. So I'm really sad to see that, 2020 is making everybody's life difficult. But I guess I would encourage the council to really think about this and, think about what Bill has said about the economic impact the Opera House has had to the city. But to go back to one of my original points, Bill, I would like to see your business plan with respect to the amount of revenue on a normal year that you expect for the concessions, and if you're doing kind of a meet and greet that your people are paying for, or a gift store, what kind of revenues you're anticipating for that during, a normal year, so we can see that there is, a light at the end of this long tunnel. And also, maybe you do have to look into like upping the ticket prices by a few dollars and charging for, I think most people are used to charging for any credit card fee. So I would hate that we're paying that 3% or whatever it is. So I would look at those things to see how we can finesse this budget to, help you out, as well as us, figuring out a way to get you consistent money to do the great job that you're doing.
Well, I respect Regina's optimism, but honestly, we can't keep bleeding like this. So my position. I think the time has come that we need to drastically change this, because we're just putting an awful lot of money that we're not getting any. The city is just losing money on the Opera House at this point. And so the optimism is nice, but it's ill-fated optimism, Regina. that's my position on it. I think it's just not working.
I
Well,
had
Sid,
a comment. Oh,
go ahead, Lisa.
well, I just, I mean, the city funds a lot of programs that improve the quality of life in the city, bring joy to people, draw people to Stoughton, whether it's visitors or new residents, and, you know, Parks and Rec, Senior Center. We offer these programs that don't necessarily pay for themselves, that don't pay for themselves. So I think to make a decision, and certainly nobody wants to make a decision this evening, but I think, you know, whether or not it starts at finance, just to kind of get a handle on what our options are in terms of just meeting our financial obligations, or what that work group might be. But I think we need to recognize the value and work to, you know, to see how we can figure out how to make it work.
And again, to respond back to Sid, you can't just, you know, if something's not working, you can't just shut the doors. You have to problem solve and think things through. Like Lisa said, you have to work on fixing it. If we lose the Opera House, we lose basically our downtown businesses. And that's a lot of people out of work. We just did a whole downtown revitalization thing. And one of the cornerstones to bring people downtown for tourism and everything like that is our Opera House. So we need to really seriously work with Bill, work with finance, and work with the community. You know, maybe we need another fundraiser, whatever, but we need to make this work. And I'm not going to allow this Opera House to actually fail because of our, you know, lack of judgment over the years of not understanding where we were on this. So
I'm going to not allow this Opera House to bleed the city the way it's been doing. So that's, yeah, your position is your position. I like your optimism. I think Lisa's optimism is wonderful, but I think my practicality is actually is something that we need to look at. This is just not working. Look at the numbers. These are taxpayers' dollars that we're spending on a something that's failing. So that's my position.
okay, Sid, you got to problem solve here. Just closing the doors is not problem solving, and you're not helping our community whatsoever by just shutting the doors. I mean, this is our job to actually make some tough decisions, but also to actually help a part of our city that means a lot to our community. If we shut this down,
we need to rebuild from the bottom up. So
Regina,
it's just
if I
not
may-
working. You know, so it's got to be a drastic change. This has to be drastic because it's just not working. We're bleeding the city's taxpayers' dollars. It's just not. It's
Listen,
not
Sid,
working.
I am going to have to chime in here because I have no idea what you're talking about. You're looking at a budget that's a multi-million-dollar annual document, and we're talking about a $300 and some thousand deficit that's been building over more than a decade. That's $300,000. That's not nothing. We're certainly not bleeding any taxpayers dry here. That is not at all what is happening. I would say that almost everyone who lives in Stoughton, certainly people who are outside of Stoughton, if you think about the value for the amount of money that the city has put into the Opera House, it's absolutely astronomically ridiculous to talk about it as an asset that has bled you dry. That is absolutely ridiculous rhetoric.
If I could interject here for a moment, please. This is Greg. I think that you know, all due respect to Sid, his vision is short-sighted. I agree with Regina. We have to look at this at long term. We have to start in finance. So I think to discuss this and argue about this anymore tonight is just counterproductive. This needs to go to finance, as it is going to be. And we will take a very long, hard look at this in finance. And I'm sure we will find out some way to make sure that we save this gem, because the downtown needs it. I mean, we have to find a way to make this work.
Does everybody have any other questions for Bill or things? Because I do think will go to finance. And again, like I encourage Bill to come with his business plan, and maybe if, maybe we need to tweak the business plan, maybe we need to bring in another business expert to help us look at how to raise more revenue, etc. I'm sure you've done that already, Bill, but just trying to help you out. Jean, did you have a comment?
Yes, I did. It was going to be just asking a clarification of Sid, but I'd like to reserve that for a different time. Bill, in addition to providing the more detailed business plan, particularly the build out with potential ideas for concession, I'm wondering what other brainstorming ideas may have come forward, and if that's in meeting minutes, even just dates of those meeting minutes, I'd be happy to go historically look at that information, because I really don't know. And I too feel that the Opera House is a gem, but I'd like to just ask the people who are on the RDA, if I remember right, when our potential developer came in for the Riverfront Development Project and did a presentation, he sort of talked about having these strong anchors, whether they're the Opera House or the library, as part of our milieu, part of our bases, and how we can best expand the traffic so that the downtown area and the riverfront area would work in union with each other. And places like the library, places like the Opera House are in the middle of that, or on the edges of that development. And I also asked us to consider that as we are growing that development too, and what information might we need right now to help us come to good decisions. So I'm asking for more information.
And I think the purpose of tonight was really just to get this in front of the group, and and really have a chance and digest it, and then come back at a fresh meeting and really get into it. And I want to thank Bill for taking the time to put this together. This is something that we've been talking about for a while, ever since I became mayor, about what we can do there and where we're going to go forward with this thing. And I know Bill and I, and Jamin and I, and Bill and Jim from the Opera House Board, we've had multiple meetings to get to this point where we could at least provide the information and really tell. Because for a long time, it was just kind of left untold. And I think that there's still an opportunity for us to continue here, but we have work to do, just like we do with any other service that we're maintain. And there's a lot of good points made by everybody tonight, and this is really only the beginning of the discussion. But the last thing we wanted to do was to continue to just pretend like this didn't exist. We really wanted to be transparent and get it out here so we could have a conversation. And I think that this will continue.
I just had a quick question or comment. I just wondered if we should consider a special finance meeting, or Brett and Jamin have a better handle on what might be coming down the pike for other future meetings. So just to give this its due time, if we need to consider a special meeting, I'd be okay with that, but I'm just throwing that out there as a comment to consider.
I'm willing to consider that as well. I know we've got a fair amount at least on the next agenda, and then we've got something else additional added in there. So, but trying to, well, I mean, we'll see where we can shoehorn that into. But I'm definitely willing to take up the task in committee and put all of this under.
That'd be
Yeah,
great.
I can trim the finance. I think there's a couple things that can wait or be pushed back. And I think even on the next Tuesday's agenda, we can at least push this subject along with the senior center annex.
Okay, let's take highest priorities first.
Yeah, I don't want, and you said this quite eloquently, I don't to be rushed. I mean, really at the end of the day, what decision we're really looking for in kind of the short term is this line, and I don't know if you can see what I just highlighted or not. It's really the difference in what we have budgeted as the transfer of 182 versus the 195, and that's the number that Bill really feels like gives him a little bit of breathing room to survive the year regardless of what scenario plays out, and not dig a deeper hole, and really just buy some time. And we're not resigning ourselves, continually giving more money. It's kind of like that, typical quote. It's not the end. It's not the beginning of the end. The beginning. We're not going to stop the work. We're going to keep working on this. So I think in the near term, this is kind of the decision piece that we're looking at. And what I can do with finance is put that together in the budget documents and show what the impact of the senior center annex is. What the visit this at the next committee. Maybe at least get a budgetary decision done for 21 while still continuing down the road of how do we cut expenses? How do we make more money? How do we find more profitable shows? Bill can gather all the data that's been requested here tonight. And this is going to be a long conversation, but it's at least the start of it.
And is the Opera House board also on board with maybe, or at least open to suggestions to go about with improving revenues?
I'm sure that they'd be open to it. I mean, it's something that's been an ongoing discussion for years. You guys mentioned credit card fees, ticketing fees, all of those. Basically anywhere where there's a fee that we weren't recovering, we are recovering now. And so we've more or less run out of places to squeeze our existing situation. And we're looking at the concession stuff as our number one kind of solution here. So that's really where we've been focused.
Yeah, the industry standard is about a 5% margin, which we've really dialed in with Jamin's leadership to get us this point in the conversation. And, Bill can provide information at the next meeting about the ticket prices really doesn't do it, because when it comes down to the ticket prices, the artist gets most of that anyway. So it's not like we could just raise prices $5 and put $4 of that in our pocket. It's really not that simple. And I think that, that would be another part of the operation. We can continue to provide, more information, probably in a smaller group, maybe at the finance committee. And then those that really want to participate can log on to that. But, just the operations is really unique from anything else that we have in the city. And as Bill mentioned, this is an industry-wide challenge right now. And it's not like we can do a drive-in, concert at the indoor venue. So there's really much we can do during the pandemic. And, you can see that even during the pandemic, there's a lot of great things going on there. And this work that, Bill presented tonight really shows that he's, put it to the grindstone here to get us to this point. So I'm thankful for that. And now we just need to, take that information and develop some strategies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the more information that we have, the better decisions we can make.
Absolutely. Seeing how it is, we've been going on for almost, 3.5 hours now. I think Unless we have any other burning questions. Jamin, is there any thoughts that you have before we go to bed?
Nope, I have a couple things I'll look at. Finance, just in general, to look at the budgetary comments that came out tonight. The 22nd meeting won't be as long. You know, tonight we wanted to get the FMP in front of you. So I appreciate everyone kind of sticking it out, and it was long, but I think we got some good work done tonight. So thank you.
No, excellent presentations. Thank you, and thank Ellers and Bill and Senior Center. It's been great. So,
I'll remind myself to look at the revised agenda also.
so we have a motion on the floor to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll make the motion.
You're
Second.
seconding? Greg put it out there. He made it.
Oh.
Whoever wants it. Second.
Flip
All
a
in
coin.
favor? Aye.
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 Thank you all for sticking with this long meeting and some great discussions.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, all.
Great.
Good.